Live. Okay. Welcome to another HealthyGamerGG. Oh, are we live? Trying something new.
So what we want to do is cultivate a capacity for kindness. So, close your eyes. Take a few moments to breathe in and breathe out.
All right. Hello. I got to do my disclaimer.
Oh, okay.
Welcome to another HealthyGamerGG stream. My name is Dr. Alok Kanoja. Just a reminder that nothing we discuss on stream today is intended to be taken as medical advice. Everything is just for educational or entertainment purposes only. If y'all have a medical concern or question, please go see a licensed professional. So thank you guys very much for coming today. We are talking with Squeex. Squeex, what do you want me to call you Squeex, bro? I don't hear you. Are you here?
Oh, hello. Can you hear me?
Yeah, it's a little lagged though. Weird.
Oh, weird.
Okay,
no, Squeex
we're
works
fine
perfectly.
now. This is fine now for me.
Test. One,
Yes,
two, three.
1, 2, 3. Okay, same.
You can call me Dr. Squeex if you want. I like it. My mom would be proud.
So, how you been, man?
It's been a while.
Yeah.
I've been great. How have you been?
It's been nutty, dude. It's been crazy since I think we talked like a year and a half, 2 years ago?
Yes. It must have been 2 years ago now. I have really fond memories of that conversation.
I don't even remember what we talked about, but I remember enjoying it immensely. And it's some of the most positive feedback we've gotten. So many people were like, we loved that collab.
Great. I mean, I don't remember specifics of what we talked about too. So we might do a round 2 of the same topic.
Sounds great, man. Okay. Recycled content. That's what we're all about.
That's the name of the game, right? And then we can react to it later.
And perfect.
Double, triple dip.
Yeah.
Wait, so what have you been up to in the last year or so?
So it's a great question. So like when I started this thing, right, it was like not, first of all, supposed to be a thing, but I was like, okay, there's a group of people who need help with their mental health. And this was like back in 2019. And so I started streaming about psychiatry and spirituality. And
good data.
I know. And then like, so over the last year or two, so I think so something that's kind of like confusing for a lot of people is that we're really dedicated to the work, which I know sounds kind of weird and sounds very circle jerkish, but so I when I look at the problem of like what's wrong with mental health in the universe today, I think it's like streaming is a huge part of the solution, but there are many other parts of the solution. So we've developed like certain programs and things like that to like help people with their lives. So over the last 2 years, we've done a lot of advocacy work. Mm-hmm. Went to Capitol Hill, went to the White House.
I saw you guys were at the UN. Weren't you?
Not at the UN, but we've collabed with the UN before.
Can I just stop you and say collab with the UN is a crazy sentence?
Yeah, I know. So there's like, because I read like all these posts and stuff from our community, and I see like what people are struggling with, and there's like a limit to how much watching things on the internet can shape your life, and there are very real. So there's a lot of evidence that our mental health crisis is like an economic crisis with a different face on it. So if you look at like, what correlates with people's poor mental health, we've got like a loneliness epidemic. We've got like, financial problems. Everyone below millennials is like screwed in some way. Mm-hmm. And so like, if we really think about, okay, how can we improve people's mental health? It goes beyond doing therapy or being a psychiatrist. It even goes beyond making content. And it's really like working with some of these other organizations to make a larger scale impact. doing things like research and stuff like that too. So I've been doing a lot of that stuff. And then I've also been, I went through a little bit of a midlife crisis,
Oh,
which
okay.
was really interesting. But then like sort of feel really good about it now. I think it's like a developmental stage,
What was the
which we don't.
result of the midlife crisis, if you don't mind sharing?
So I think I had kind of been spiritually coasting for many years.
Hmm.
So I went kind of hard into spirituality because I like, you know, I woke up one day and I was like, what the hell am I doing? Like, what is
Yeah,
this?
sure.
You know, it's like, am I just going to continue streaming about mental health and making YouTube videos for the next decade of my life? And how much of an impact is that really going to have?
Sure.
And what am I on this earth for? We also, you know, it's kind of interesting because we really do try to price our products and services to be available. So one of the biggest pieces of feedback that we get is like, oh, you know, your guide is way too cheap. So
Hmm.
people will be like, you should sell it for like $200, $300. That's what medical doctors who sell courses on the internet sell it for. But we're really proud of, or I'm proud of, like the fact that people in 121 countries can afford it.
Yeah.
But then that also creates challenges from like a financial standpoint because we leave a lot of money on the table. And so there's some sponsorship offers that we've gotten from companies that probably in retrospect, it's good that we didn't take them from even a perspective.
Sure.
But, you know, sometimes when you get faced with those sponsorships, it's like, okay, do you want to does it feel wrong to you? And how much, you know, how many zeros of money are you going to pass up? And
Yes.
so I was
That's
like,
like every sponsor. You have to play that little mental gymnastics a little bit. You're
yep.
like, is this worth the risk or is this ethically okay to take?
Yeah.
And
So,
yeah.
and in our case, it was sort of like the way what I was really struggling with was like, okay, if I take the sponsorship, how much good can we do with this capital?
Yeah.
Right. It's not, I mean, it's never really been about like, I mean, I play Dota too, man. Like the game is free. I've been playing it for 13 years.
Yeah. Can I
Um,
ask you a question about
yeah.
what you said? You said like you went through a midlife crisis and
Mhm.
you know, and related to if you really want to be doing like YouTube and stuff all the time. And then you mentioned as well earlier that you're, you know, for the last year and a half, you're collabing with the UN, you're going to the White House, you're making courses. And I know you have this thing called AOE healing where you try to heal, you know, as many people as possible. What avenue have you found that to be the most effective with your company's mission statement?
Great question. So I think it's kind of weird, but one of the key things that I came away with is like focusing on efficacy is not the goal. I know it
Yeah,
sounds so weird, but it's
sure.
sort of like there's some balance of like, you know, is it effective? So we went to Capitol Hill a couple of months ago and met with two senators' offices and three or four Congress person's offices. And so like, is that effective? Like, I don't know. So I think a
Mhm.
big part of that reframing was really thinking about, okay, what's the target we're shooting for? And what I sort of settled on is like, we're going to try to just do random amounts of good in ways that feel good. And even if it isn't effective, because there are a lot of things that we do today that are not effective.
Sure.
You could argue that this stream is not the most effective use for solving the mental health crisis.
You're
But
kidding.
and also, that's okay. So I
Yeah,
think that's a big part of what I kind of worked through is like, okay, because then you start getting into metrics and it's like, how do I make the biggest impact? And it's like, you know what? Better people than me can save the world and make the biggest impact and you know, get into that. I'm going to do what feels good to me. I'm going to do what feels right to me. I'm going to do what feels fun to me. And like, I'm okay. I don't have to make the biggest impact. I want to make some impact and I want to help people. But I actually moved away from efficacy as like an outcome. And
yeah,
not that we don't measure it in some way, but that's not like the North Star. I think a lot of the problems that I see with like startups today is that, you know, impact is their North Star. And then
yeah,
they end up making a lot of what I think are like uh maybe the right word is compromising decisions for
sure.
the sake of their North Star. And they wind up in a place that is very different from where they started.
Yeah, I mean, I remember I worked in like a lot of startups, and the one word that would really trigger me was scalability.
Hmm.
When we're talking about things like mental health, or we're talking about things that are artsy or creative, you almost don't want scalability. Like, you don't want to make the most of everything. You want to, like, you're saying you want to make the biggest impact, but that could be just impacting one person greatly. Like, what I'm trying to say is, it's not about how many people you reach, but it's about what you reach them with. Like, you know, like how deep can you go with your individual customers? So I feel like that's like a huge thing. Even with streaming, everyone's like, try to get as many viewers as you can, but it's like, how can you show more appreciation and really delve into your niche? That should be the question you're asking a little bit. So for any business, I feel like scalability is this ugly word that's like, let's just, and then you end up standing for nothing.
Yeah. So, I mean, I agree. I mean, I think scalability has has some value, but I think a great example of that is like, so for years, people have been telling me like, oh, you should build an app and like have some subscription-based model, right? Join the enshittification of content and charge people a monthly fee for things that they will never own and can be revoked because of some licensing agreements in the fine print.
Let me just break my social media addiction by installing a new social media to help me break my social media addiction.
And so we have a membership now, but for many years, like the key thing was like, people were telling me like, sign up, start a Patreon and do this and do that. And I was like, but what do people get?
Yeah.
Right. Like, it's not, I'm sure a subscription model makes us more money, but like, just because it makes like, what do people get for that? And so we finally, it took us about 4.5 years, but there, in speaking of going deep, so there's a group of things that I wanted to talk about that would not perform well on the YouTube algorithm. And so that's where we started our memberships, where people basically now they vote on what they want me to talk about. So like, I'll prepare lectures that are determined by the members. And the really fun thing about that, so the other challenge that we ran into is that a lot of like the good work that we want to do, I think is contrary to metrics on the internet. So one thing that performs terribly is if I make a 5-part, let's say, YouTube lecture series on emotions, part number 1 will do great, and each subsequent part will be like half as good, and it'll kill your channel because no one wants, like, no one's going to stick around for part 5. But on the membership side, it's completely different. So these are people who are invested in kind of long-term stuff. So it's really cool because for me, it allows me to like go deeper into topics instead of staying on the surface.
Yeah.
And it feels a lot more like, okay, you all get to choose. So we had a lecture this past week on soulmates, which is like a really fascinating topic. And that one may have done okay, but like, you know, we'll do like kind of advanced stuff, like weird stuff about spirituality, which is another big thing for me, is like I went hard into spirituality again for the first time. Like, so for a couple of years, I've been doing some pretty hardcore spiritual practice, and that has completely changed my perspective.
Oh, what practice?
I started doing some more serious tantric practice, and then a couple of other Kriya type practices.
Oh, okay. Can you explain that for people who may not know?
Sure. What do you know what that means?
No.
Okay. I wasn't.
I have no clue. I know I am brown, but I'm not that brown, unfortunately.
Here's the way I would explain it. So there's like, you know, if you look at spiritual practices, there's a range of things that are plausible to things that are or maybe scientific to esoteric. Is like, there's like a spectrum. Okay. So if we look at something like mindfulness, which is not even meditation really, but mindfulness is like completely above board. There are tons of studies on it. Like, we don't really know exactly what it does or how it works, but it reduces depression, anxiety, narcissism by somewhere around 20%, improves focus, productivity. And then there's all this like weird stuff. So when I started my meditative practice, I was very skeptical.
Yeah.
And so I started with the practices that were like scientifically verified. And I thought a lot of this weird stuff, like about like these, you know, different dimensions of consciousness and crap like that, like I thought all that was basically BS.
Yeah.
And then, but over the last couple of years, and then I also, you know, was skeptical of spiritual gurus who charged gigantic piles of money.
Yeah.
And then I realized that there are a lot of scam artists there, but that there are some, through my own practice and being a teacher in some ways, I realized that there are like some things that I think are really I changed my mind on a lot of that stuff.
Oh, interesting.
So, and I mean, I guess we can go into more detail if you want to, but like, I realized that there's just a lot of biases that we have that are like ignorant biases, right? So someone who is skeptical of, let's say, a high-priced meditation initiation, or even the concept of initiation, is working from a place of ignorance. They have no idea what initiation is. They don't know why it works, and they think it's bad. So over about 18, 19 years of practice, I started to realize that, oh, a lot of this crap is valid. And I understood why it's valid, how it's valid. So I would say I took the plunge in some ways.
Oh, interesting.
And did a couple of things that I had avoided. And I also realized that I had avoided those things out of essentially a certain degree of ego and ignorance, because I don't really know what it's like. I don't know. I'm just judging. If I see a big price tag, I think that this person must be a scam artist. And so I did a couple of those things, and it's been quite revolutionary.
Wow. I mean, I'm so curious on what those things were.
Yeah,
because
so we don't talk about it.
I share your same skepticism on like the guru charging a lot of money, because I feel like, you know, you grew up in India and you hear about these like gurus in villages who are just like basically taking advantage of poor people, is how I used to see it, where they would charge people at like basically all their money to reach some sort of enlightenment. I feel like that's antithetical to what enlightenment should represent. It's like, it shouldn't be a cause and effect or input thing. It should be like a quiet solo work. Like enlightenment can't be sold is what my preconceived notion is. But maybe you know something. Maybe there's some practices that are legit.
Yeah. So I think it's a very reasonable statement to make. But and this is going to get weird, but I think there are presumptions about the nature, like the metaphysics of enlightenment, that I think that we're missing a couple of things. So one good example of this is diksha, which means initiation. So people think that there is, you know, like if I get initiated into a practice and versus I just like read a book about the practice or watch a video about the practice, those are qualitatively quite different. That's my view now. So to receive diksha from a guru, they basically impart, it's like they impart a portion of their spiritual energy into you, which is kind of like receiving a down payment for a house. So it's like when your parents give you a down payment for a house, like it drastically changes the trajectory of your financial situation, right? So instead of like starting in debt, and so the efficiency of the growth increases very rapidly when you receive diksha. And so those kinds of concepts I didn't really understand very well until I started digging into it more and more and more. And then that begs the question, what does spiritual energy mean? So then that's a whole different conversation about understanding that the reason that meditation works for some people and doesn't work for other people is because of like this, basically the spiritual energy accumulation stat, which you can meditate and it can have some mental effects and some physiological effects. But there's a third dimension of like leveling up, which is really what matters for enlightenment. And I would agree that enlightenment can't be bought or sold, but there are absolutely certain techniques and certain things that can increase your propensity for enlightenment. I believe that.
So then my question is, and sorry, if you want to move on, I'm happy to move on as well. But my question is, then why is there a price tag on it?
Oh, what a great question.
Like if it's so revolutionary, it's like enlightenment is described as basically a fundamental, you know, it's almost every human's journey, whether they know it or not. So it's like, then why are people charging anything for it in the first place? Like distribution?
So no, it's that's a question that I can't confidently answer, but I have a couple of ideas. The first is that sometimes when they charge things, what they're charging for is essentially their time. So when you work with some gurus, they will do spiritual practices on your behalf. So it's basically like outsourcing a portion of your spiritual grinding.
So like it's like Bluetooth spiritualism. How does that work?
Yes.
That's pretty crazy.
Yeah, it's crazy, right? So if I were to ask you, Squeex, if you want to imagine you wanted to like make a work of art, or you wanted to like have a garden, like you can outsource that labor. And the outsourcing of spiritual labor, I think, is a possibility. So that's one piece of it.
Okay.
A second piece of it is that sometimes there are certain objects which are rare and materially valuable. So, for example, like if you get a yantra, which is like a mystical symbol, oftentimes it'll be made of a precious metal. And so the price that the guru charges, as crazy as it sounds,
Is the cost of the
economically
metal.
varies with like the price of gold or the price of silver. So that's the second piece. The third thing, and this is the big one, is that a lot of it is about the ego and the faith of the recipient. So like
Okay.
let's say I have like $100, and when I say to myself, I'm going to spend $50 of my $100 on a spiritual thing, I think it changes something internally within me. So I suspect that that is a big part of it. But why do they charge so much? I'm not sure.
Because like it's sort of like the same argument of like a lot of hustle culture bros. Like will be like, sign up for my course and it's expensive, and if you don't pay for it, it means you're not fully bought in. So don't waste my time. You know what I mean? It's like it's almost an impossible thing to break through, because it logically makes sense, but it's like, yeah, but like if it was that revolutionary, why is it so expensive? So I don't know. But
yeah, so I think there are a lot of attitudes around money and worth. Right. So I think for me, like, and this is a big part of what I've learned over the last couple of years, is like the importance of faith. I don't mean faith as in like believing in a particular God. What I mean is that, see, when it's hard, it's kind of hard to explain, but when you take the plunge, that's what it was for me. There's a drastic change to the way that you approach your practice. And when I'm sort of sitting there from the perspective of being the judge, right? I'm judging whether this is okay or not okay. Anytime you judge, judgment requires an understanding of something, right? In order to judge something, I have to say this is good or this is bad, which means I have to have a certain impression of it. Does that make sense? You can't judge without knowledge.
But I feel like if something doesn't make logical sense, then even if you don't understand it, you can judge it. Like if I was like, Dr. K, like I could just make up some random shit that doesn't exist, and then you would inherently judge it, even if you're not a subject expert.
Totally agree. I'm just saying that there's judgment. Where there's a second part of this.
Sure.
Right.
Okay.
So your judgment is based on logic. Fine. It's based on. That's my point. Is that you can't make a judgment without knowledge.
Sure. Okay. Right? Agreed. Yeah.
So now there's a certain problem, which is that if you have knowledge, your receptivity to new knowledge goes down.
Sure.
Right. So if I have to explain to my Indian parents why arranged marriage is not a good idea, that's going to be an uphill battle because they have a preconceived notion.
Yes.
Does that make sense?
Yes.
So then, now here's the tricky thing. So if knowledge gets in the way of the acquisition of more knowledge, there's a really great analogy of this that's like an old meditation analogy about, there's a student who comes to his teacher and he's studied with like a lot of different people, and the teacher is trying to teach him stuff. And then the student is like, but this guy said this, and this guy said this, and this guy said this. And so the teacher says, bring me 2 cups, bring me a cup of water and a cup of milk. And he says, okay, now take the cup of milk and pour it into the cup of water. And the student is like, that's not going to work. And he's like, just do it. So he starts adding the milk, and then everything overflows. And so the teacher's like, look, it's fine if you want to learn from me, but the first thing you've got to do is empty your cup, right? Remove your preconceived notions if you want to understand something. And that's absolutely true from like the hugest lesson. One of the biggest parts of psychiatry is being able to do that. When a patient walks into my office and says, hey, I'm suicidal, one of the hardest things to do is to remove all of my understanding of what life is, what's good about life, what's fun about life, why life is worth living, and really try to understand this person's perspective. And the more that we have our own cognitive biases, the harder it is to learn.
Sure.
So if we are judging, that means we have knowledge. If we have knowledge, it is harder to receive the teacher's teaching. Okay. Now, here's where things get really hard. There is a scale of difficulty of understanding in spirituality. So there are some things that are easy to understand and some things that are really, really hard to understand. And the harder things to understand require a very empty cup. So if you want to understand, like, for example, some of these weird esoteric concepts that don't make logical sense, then you have to be as empty as possible. And to be as empty as possible, you have to have a lot of faith. So you're like you're moving in a direction without a knowledge of what you're going to gain. And this is where things become really difficult. The more logic you have, the more you have a preconceived notion, the harder it is to understand. So there's something weird going on with faith where, like, the more faith you have and the more ignorant you have, the more you surrender, the easier it is to proceed along the spiritual path. The problem is that the more faith you have, the more you surrender, the more ripe you are for plucking by abusive gurus.
Yeah.
Right? So that's what makes it really challenging. And I think that, like, the prerequisites to success are exactly the prerequisites to getting screwed. And that's challenging, for sure.
Then how do you work on unknowledging? Is that something that's even achievable? Because I feel like this. Can you explain how that is? Like, do you have to go through exercises where you, like, because I feel like no matter how many spiritual practices you do, or no matter how much meditation or, puja or whatever you do, you're still going to have, no matter what, an unshakable inside voice that's like, this is bullshit. That you just have to, and it's impossible to fight against.
I don't think so. So like, for example, like if you were to do so I think a key, it's actually pretty simple. So the first thing is that a lot of these, what I like about this meditative tradition is it is practice focused and method focused. So when you, for example, when you get initiated into a mantra, you just chant the mantra, right?
Yeah.
So your teacher says, chant the mantra every day for like 1 year. And that voice will be there, doubting or whatever. But when you are actually chanting the mantra, the voice will go away because you're focused on chanting the mantra. And then as you chant the mantra, the voice may crop up. Let's say it takes you 21 minutes to chant the mantra 108 times. The voice will crop up outside of those 21 minutes, the voice will crop up, and you learn to just ignore it.
Sure.
And then what happens is, as you chant the mantra more and more and more, and as you gain experience will come with knowledge, new knowledge, right? So as you do reps of something, as I play a video, I think, oh, this video game is shit. If I ignore that voice for some amount of time and I start to play the video game, and I really just focus on playing the video game.
Yeah.
And focus is really important, because if you don't have focus, what'll happen is, while you are playing the video game, your mind will be there's a separate half of your mind is playing the video game, half of your mind is judging. Oh, this game is not as good as BG3. This game is not as good as Super Mario 64. This game is different from this. I wish it were like, wow, it needs to be this way. So you're like constantly judging while you are engaged in an experience. This is also why dating is a mess. Because now anytime you go on a date, someone is not with you. They're judging you constantly. Oh, this person could be this way. They could be this way. My ex was like this. I need my partner to be more like this. I need you to, how much money do you make? It's just constant judgment. So you're not with someone. You're not with the experience.
Yeah.
So the more focused you are, like literally as you are one pointed, there is no space for judgment. And so all of that past knowledge starts to disappear while you are doing the practice. And then you will gain certain insights, which then will get you closer to hopefully truth.
Yeah. I think I'm just bringing my own preconceived notions right now,
which is
and it's like unbreakable. Cause I feel like I've tried a lot of meditation. I've tried like transcendental meditation, and I've tried like prayers and all of this stuff. And it feels really great for 30 minutes. And then you're out and about, and then all that stuff washes away. It feels very temporary in my experience.
Have you had a teacher?
Yeah, I went to Bal Vihar. So that's like the extent of my teaching, which is like every week we would have basically a parent volunteer and a guru.
Yeah. So you haven't had, what do you mean by guru?
We would have someone like in our area who like was trained from India.
And what is the frequency and duration of your meditation practice?
So this was when I was a kid. I used to meditate every day for 30 minutes.
For how long?
30 minutes.
For what period of time?
Oh, for 2 years.
And so every day for 30 minutes, what kind of meditation?
Well, I got into it by using one of those apps, but then I
Okay.
started doing it in silence. And then I tried doing transcendental meditation, where it's like you say, there's like this person who assigned me like a word,
Yep.
and it was like a very Silicon Valley esque. So then I tried that, um, and then yeah, and then I gave up on it.
Okay. Yeah. So I'm not hearing that you had a good teacher.
No, I did not have a good teacher.
So I think your teacher needs to understand Jnana Yoga,
Hmm.
first of all, right? So I think the first thing. So this is what I mean. Maybe this is just I'm projecting a little bit here, but so the person who got me into meditation, it started with a 2-hour walk every day for 30 days. There was no meditating. He was just like asking me questions about things, and I would ask him questions. I would be like,
Yeah.
what's the fucking point? And he's like, what a great question.
Right.
And so what was really interesting is that like and then he did some weird Jedi mind trick where like I would ask him some question. And like, so on Monday, he'd give me some practice and he's like, try doing this thing. And then on Tuesday, I'd come with a question. He's like, okay, I understand your question. Just keep doing the practice. And then on Wednesday, I'd come back and I'd be like, oh, this is really interesting because this practice that I did, I discovered this. And he's like, is that your answer? And I was like, yeah, that was my answer. How the fuck, what is going on here? So I
Right.
think in your case, a big part of it is not just meditating just for the fucking sake of it. It's like, what is the purpose of meditation for you? Why should you? There's no reason to meditate
Hmm.
for you. That's
Oh,
number one,
okay. Interesting. I
right?
never.
Like,
I mean, my understanding, like what was helpful for me was sitting in silence for 30 minutes.
what's
That,
helpful
but
about that?
it felt like I could file away my thoughts.
What does
Where
that
like
mean?
because you know how like I don't know what this is gonna sound a little hocus pocus, but when I've noticed I'm walking in my daily life, there's sort of an underlying experiencer in my head.
Okay.
That's someone who's like, oh, like someone's in the elevator with me. I better stand a certain way, or like something that's guiding my actions. And so there's like 1 degree of fogginess between what I'm doing and what's in my head. But when I started meditating, it felt like all of these prior things that I'm subconsciously thinking about, whether I recognize it or not, is filed away. So I'm just more comfortable being silent and being in the presence of other people. That was something that helped me when I'm quietly meditating. None of this like going and doing, making sure I get the sticker in my Baviar book to do like Thrayam Bakam Yajamahe or whatever. Like, but it was just being quiet for 30 minutes allowed my brain to like, have you ever like defragged your computer? That's sort of like the image I have where it's like,
Okay.
it's going through my disk and cleaning it up.
Okay. So I'm confused. So
Mhm.
it sounded like the meditation was helpful for you.
It was helpful for me, but then I realized when I don't meditate, like it's like that. And then when I stop, like a few days later, I have to like it wipes clean. Like I have to keep. It's like then that becomes part of my daily ritual. Um.
And what do you think about that? How do you feel about that?
Uh. It's good. I just stopped doing it for some reason. I think I just had bad experience with silicon like transcendental meditation, honestly. And then I just have been too lazy to go back. But yeah.
So I'm a bit confused
Hmm. How could
because you're,
I?
huh?
Yeah. How could I be more clear?
Yeah,
What's
yeah.
the confusion around?
So you're saying that first of all, there's some experiencer, and that you
Yeah.
have a cloud of thoughts,
Yeah.
and the cloud of thoughts make it hard for you to participate in life in a joyful way.
Mhm.
And I'm a bit confused by this 1 degree of fog. What does that mean?
What it basically means is this is where I said hocus pocus, where it feels like I want to draw an analogy for you. Do you mind if I think for a second?
That's fine.
Like, do you know when you're alone in a room, like you don't think of yourself being perceived, right?
Okay.
But the second, and this is why I draw it to my elevator analogy, which I just made up. But the second someone comes into that room and looks at you, instantly your thoughts escape your own self and you're like, oh, how am I being perceived? Then you start micro adjusting your clothes, you start standing a certain way, you start uh you know, you just start to look at yourself through someone else's eyes. And what I'm trying to say is that is due to like a haziness of oneself that I've
Okay.
realized that I have.
Okay.
So what I'm trying to say is meditating allows me to explore myself a little bit more so that when I am with someone or when I am in a group, I feel confident in my internal being, where I don't have to feel like I have a need for micro adjusting or whatever. So
How
that's
does that
something that
work?
I have no clue.
Is
I've
that
got no idea. That's
okay?
the magic of it. I think it's like, and if I was to sort of logically, you know, try to look at it, my thinking is, it just like when you are in a silent room, it allows you to process prior traumas or prior experiences that you have in a way that it like cleans your inside spiritually, so that when someone else is with you, you feel just more confident. I don't know how to explain it, but
Okay.
that's my best attempt at logically explaining.
Give me a second.
Does that make sense, or was that just jargon?
Oh no, it makes a lot of sense.
Okay, good.
We're gonna learn a couple of things. Here we go. Okay, I got to figure out. I don't know if Anthony, if you're around, is there some way I can screen share? I don't know. Let me see if I can screen share.
Okay.
Maybe what I can actually do is, oh, I can screen share. Hold on. I see. I'm going to try this. And hopefully other people can see this too. Okay, can you see this?
I cannot.
Ooh. Can other people see this? I'm sharing my screen.
Let me open my chat. Do you guys see? No. 2.
No. Okay, let's try again. Window. Can you click on the? Do you see on the left side? Is there something you can click on?
That says private chat.
Not private chat.
No, there's nothing I can click on.
Okay. Let me see if. Okay. All right. Well.
Oh, I see a what happened that just popped up.
Yes, I am trying to screen share. When I click the button, nothing happens.
Big shout out to Anthony. Very helpful setting this up. I've never used this website before.
I never have either. This is the first time.
Oh, really?
That's working so well.
Oh, gotcha.
Okay. Let me see if I can. Maybe we can, while we're waiting, we can do a follow along.
Yeah.
But okay, so I'm gonna post a link in chat. Can you post it to your chat too?
Sure.
So let's take a look at this paper. I'm gonna DM it to you on Discord. You can post it to your chat.
Okay.
Send it to me if you can. Yeah, I can send it to you, bruh. Let me see if I can.
Oh, do I have to open this?
No. It looks like he's gonna figure.
Oh,
it.
perfect.
Okay, so it's this FPSYG. Okay, I'm posting it in Slack.
In Slack.
Sent
I just got
response.
PTSD.
Okay, yeah, sorry about that.
I still get nervous when I hear that noise. The Slack notification noise, or whatever it is. I hate that.
So there we go. So
there we go.
Anthony, can you scroll down? Scroll down till you get a diagram. There we go. That's the one. Zoom in.
God. This is a really long journal.
Don't worry about it, bro. We're gonna explain it.
All right, cool.
So can we zoom in, Anthony? Yeah, and let me see that diagram. Yeah, go up now. There we go. Beautiful. Okay. So let's understand one or two things.
Okay.
So when you perception of another's attention.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so when someone looks at you, This triggers something in your brain called self-referential processing. So when someone else looks at you, it triggers you seeing yourself through other people's eyes.
Oh my God. Yeah, exactly.
Exactly, right?
Yeah.
And then what happens is you can see this triggers affective systems. So what this means is this will trigger emotions. This will trigger thoughts, and this will trigger bodily responses. Now you're adjusting your shirt. You pull your finger, which has been so far up your nose, now gets pulled out.
Yeah.
Right. So there are all kinds of
true.
behaviors that we do, pissing in the shower, like whatever.
Yeah.
You know, eating a BLT when we're taking a dump, like whatever degenerate behaviors that we normally do in silence.
Right. And then someone walks into the stall and you put down the BLT and just take the dump.
Absolutely.
Right.
And then you ask him to hold it while you wipe. And then,
Oh, God.
right.
Of
So
course.
Anthony, we can stop screen sharing. Thank you, buddy. So this is what happens.
Yeah.
Okay. So then if you sort of think about it, like what's happening is the focus of your mind now develops, just like we were saying, a parallel track. Mm-hmm. Now you are not in the moment. You're not enjoying the BLT. You are thinking about what this person thinks about you. And this literally triggers a cascade of emotions, cognitive processing, bodily reactions. But the main thing is that you are not in the moment anymore, because now you're thinking about them. So when you meditate, you say that when I'm in a room by myself, it removes this level of fog. So what I would say is that if we think about like your attention, right? So if we think about 100% of your attention, your RAM, when you meditate is 100% on your experience of things. The moment that someone else enters the door, this triggers a cascade of thoughts and emotions and things like that that are somewhat unpleasant.
Yeah.
The other thing that's going on here, and this is I'm going to try to explain it, is that, see, when you meditate, your impression of who you are comes only from you. Mm-hmm. When you are with other people, your impression of who you are is fractured between your experience and their perception of your experience. So if I go to school with a Ninja Turtles backpack and I'm excited because I like Ninja Turtles, I wanted this Ninja Turtles backpack. I'm happy. I'm like, I got my Ninja Turtles backpack. And the second kids start making fun of me, this is very confusing.
Yeah.
Now there's a part of me that loves it, and there's a part of me that like doesn't love it, and I'm getting really confused. And so then over time, what starts to happen is we start to compromise who we are. We try to reconcile this internal thing with this external impression. And we slowly, and this we understand, right? This is why you are getting tons of Slack messages, because you compromised what you wanted for the sake of the world around you. Mm-hmm. And as you compromise in that way, generally speaking, it leads to unhappiness, because I'm the most happy when I'm with my Ninja Turtles backpack.
Yeah.
So if we think about the purpose of meditation, or not the purpose, a purpose for you is to more solidly connect with that internal sense of who you are. But this is important, not in a way that's temporary, but in a way that you carry with you throughout the day.
Yeah.
So as you carry it with you, as people start to judge you, you acknowledge that judgment. You can even acknowledge like the necessity of, I don't know if this kind of makes sense, but you can acknowledge the necessity of playing the game, but your internal investment is not there. Mm-hmm. Right? So I can look at the situation and say, I need to shave today because I'm going to stream. I don't care about streaming, but I recognize that if I don't shave, there will be some consequences. I don't have to be emotionally invested. I don't have to, but there's a difference between recognizing, okay, I need to wear a tie. When I was an intern, one day I didn't like ties. I still don't like ties. And so one day one of my superiors was like, hey, you need to wear a tie every day. And I was like, I don't like ties. They're unsanitary. Here's a paper that shows how they transmit infections. And they were like, I don't care. You need to wear a tie because that's what we do. And I was like, okay, fine. Right. So there's a difference between playing the game and, oh my God, this person said I need to wear a tie. I'm doing a terrible job. That affective response it can be controlled, right? So then I can look at the situation and say dispassionately, I need to do this kind of thing, but I don't have to get butthurt about it.
Yeah.
So as we get more grounded in our sense of self, we stop getting butthurt about people being upset with us. Because normally what people do is they get some weird like reaction where instead of getting butthurt, I'm going to get angry at you, or there's some weird fucking psychological stuff that happens, psychological defense mechanisms, narcissism, whatever. I have to reject this person's criticism. I can't receive their criticism, but I can receive the criticism and not get butthurt about it. So what I'm hearing, the value that you gained was something in that way, but that you had difficulty translating it over.
Yes.
And it worked only for the 30 minutes that you did it.
It worked for like an hour. It was like, you know how like there's like an afterglow period a little bit where I was like, oh, I feel so at peace and I feel good. And then I'll read some stupid shit and I'll be like, oh, I'm way back in my own self.
So that's where I'd say that a targeted meditation practice that helps you discover your true nature and or helps you find emptiness within you would help you way more than whatever you were doing.
Yeah.
Right. So I think the meditation in your case is, first of all, there's got to be more conversations like this where like someone is teaching you the value of what you're doing and there's a lot more pieces to it. I'm kind of speed running a little bit because
that's fine.
Hey, it's you.
That's me. I'm speedrunner.
But then there's a lot more questions about, you know, even why you should meditate. Like, what do you want?
Yes.
Because meditation is ultimately a tool to help you understand yourself. And until there's like a goal that you're invested in, that once you figure out what the goal is, then you figure out the appropriate practice and then you do it. And then hopefully you see the benefits of it. This is where faith becomes important because there's going to be a lag time between the expectation. When I tell you, hey, Squeex, if you do this practice, it will help you feel comfortable in yourself. There's going to be a lag time between that benefit and the work. Right. Sure. So you're saying, oh, hey, you said it was going to do this. It's not doing that. Yeah, you need to keep doing it.
Interesting.
Also, a good teacher will modify your practice based on what challenges you're having. If you say, hey, I can't concentrate long enough, then they'll tell you do this and and things like that. So I think it's, I think it could help you a lot. And also, so what?
Yeah.
Right. It's like, it's up to you.
But I find it interesting, Dr. Case. I've never heard someone ever say the phrase like meditate with a goal in mind. Like I've heard gurus and many people say to me like you should never meditate with an end result in mind, that you should meditate and find what those end results are. Does that make sense? Have you heard that?
Yes, okay. I've heard that. So let's understand 2 or 3 things, okay?
Okay.
So I think that one of the biggest problems with meditation in the world today is that 99% of meditation teachers are like pretty bad at it. I know it's a judgmental statement, but I think Bal Vihar is a great example. So I grew up, for those, can you explain what Bal Vihar is?
Yeah, well, I'll explain it through my experience of Bal Vihar as a kid. Basically, a lot of Indian parents will send their kids, often who are in the United States, to a school every week, and all of the parents will teach them like Hinduism. And you get stickers in your book if you like memorize like certain prayers. Basically it would be like, we'd go every week and I wouldn't complain so I could have a sleepover with my friends and play Melee. That's what I really remember. It was like, if you do all of the steps, you're rewarded with video games. And so Bal Vihar was just like, it's like religious school for an hour on a Saturday. Yeah.
So I had a similar experience of like Sunday school, and I think it really turned me off from spiritual practice. First of all, there wasn't a whole lot of spirituality in it, right? There wasn't like and so I think what happens is that you have people who have good intentions, which is that we want to teach kids to meditate, but they're not actually qualified meditation teachers.
Right.
So if you really look at it, and I think this is also a big problem like in Hinduism, where we're like, you have some of these organizations that will mass produce swamis.
Yeah.
But
like
I
Amazon
think
swamis.
And it's because
Prime
they have like a mission, which I'm not disagreeing with the mission. I think it's like if they're like, okay, we want to help the world, so we're going to mass produce spiritual masters.
Yeah.
But I think if you look at the Zen tradition, it's 30 years of training and you don't even graduate at the end. Whether you graduate or not depends on your spiritual aptitude. And some people can be there for 7 years and they can graduate. Some people be there for 30 years and you don't graduate. So what we have in the world today is I pay money to become a certified meditation teacher.
Mm-hmm.
And after I pay my money and I show up to class for 12 weeks, no one is saying you have not attained the states of consciousness necessary to be a qualified teacher. I'm not giving you a certificate. No one does that.
No. Yeah.
So what's happening is that there's no measure of aptitude before someone becomes a meditation teacher.
Yeah.
So what that means is that a lot of people are teaching meditation without understanding some of the fundamentals. And this is where we get to some of this crap like this.
Yeah.
That statement is true. But I think it applies to a very small, this is what I was saying earlier about the value of faith. It took me 20 years to realize that and understand that. And
Sure.
what my experience with meditation teachers has heavily biased me, where this is not just meditation, right? So when I'm like teaching at medical students, I don't teach the same thing to every student. It's like if this person doesn't understand the difference between OCD and OCPD, I'm not going to give them the same platitudes that I would give someone who's trying to understand the difference between depressive disorder and bipolar disorder.
Yeah.
So there's what's happening is we are making cookie cutter meditation teachers who are inducted into certain techniques who don't know how to modify their teachings based on what the pupil needs.
And then when I hear something that's contrary to that, like a record play, I'm like, blah, 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 that's wrong because a teacher once said it. But you're so right. It doesn't, it doesn't apply.
Yeah. So then you're going to develop a lot of attitudes toward meditation, which are logical.
Yes.
Because when you have a bunch of, not crappy is not the right word, but non-aptitude based teachers, passion based teachers, dharmic teachers, amateurs, like fine, ton of experience. It's not that they can't teach everybody, but with the difference between, what makes a good teacher or a bad teacher is not that you can't teach. It's that who is the crappiest student in the class and how much are you able to elevate them?
Yeah. It's so funny. It reminds me of like an analogy of required reading growing up kind of ruins reading when you're older, where like they make you read the most boring shit ever. And then of course people don't want to read books because they associate it with like, tests and assignments and stuff. So it's very similar in that light. If a bad experience with meditation because of a poor teaching, you'll always see it in a poor light.
And I think if you went through some TM based whatever Silicon Valley thing, like, I think that. So I used to be a lot more negative towards TM than I am now, but I think TM is a really good example. And there's some weird metaphysical stuff going on there of like just generation after generation of imparting spiritual knowledge that I think has basically been watered down because that initial Shakti from Maharishi Mahesh Yogi to his initial disciples, it kind of wanes over time unless you like boost it up. So it's like, I gave you a down payment, but unless you pay off the house and you sell it, you start earning rental income on it, you can't make the down payment for someone else. Yeah. So the down payment shrinks and shrinks and shrinks and shrinks. That's my understanding of it.
Yeah. No, I mean, even in the context of like doing it through Silicon Valley or work it just perverts the meaning behind all of the meditation, in my opinion. But
sure. Yeah. I think that's a valid opinion.
Yeah. Okay. Well, I would hope to change gears if you're okay.
Yeah.
I did reach out to you to talk to you specifically about racism, South Asian racism on the internet being normalized. And I did want to ask you your experience. Have you seen that trend or is that something that I'm just making up? Like because we're completely on opposite spectrums of content creation. And so I'm curious what your experience has been on things like Twitter or,
I don't use Twitter.
Oh shit, that solves the problem. And just like that, thanks for the episode. That's the end of the episode.
But I mean, I think what's been your experience? Like what difference does it make what my experience is?
Well, because I'm curious to see if this is just something that lives in a silo or that affects someone like you who may be a little less connected on social media. And if not, that's interesting to me as well. Because I know like my experience has been like in the past year specifically, like Twitter has been so anti-Indian without any pushback. And I feel like I'm walking on this balance beam of I don't want to go on one side where I'm like, I feel what I'm basically saying is I'm pulled in two directions. One is like you have a responsibility to say something about it, and the other side is you don't want to be seen as like social justice warrior Squeex, like sensitive Squeex. So like that's sort of the balance beam that I feel like I'm walking across. So I thought what a great opportunity to talk to another fellow Indian about what their experience would be and how to tackle
Yeah.
that.
So tell me what have you seen on the internet recently?
Oh man, like on Twitter, Dr. K, it is a minefield of anti-Indian hatred. And I don't know if you've seen this news story of this young fella on Doge who like tweeted out anti-Indian sentiment and got fired and then got brought back, like onto Doge. But I feel like it's rampant right now, and there's no pushback whatsoever besides like people from India on Twitter, like basically, unfortunately, making a fools of themselves.
Do you want me to tell you what we see?
Sure. So I have some info about what is on my Twitter. Hello.
Uh-oh.
I don't know if I'm camera ready.
Okay, you
This is
can.
a live
I think you're fine. This is. Go ahead.
Hey,
Hello.
Squeex.
Hi.
How
How's
you
it
doing?
going?
You got to
I
step
can't
up.
hear you.
Oh,
Hey, how are you?
good.
I have a friend who I think you should meet, by the way. I've got like 3, but I have like a front runner.
Right.
I won't tell you which one. I think I manage our socials, well, not super actively, but I would say it's less than 1%. But whenever there's like one piece of venom on the internet, that will catch.
Mhm.
But it's not like they're talking to us a lot of times. They're just talking into the void. And then there's like, I don't know, the bottom feeders that like to catch that. But it's so easy to just be like, I don't know that I care for your opinion. You
Right.
know, I've never seen a comment from someone whose opinion that I really care about where I'm like, oh, sucks to suck,
hmm
It's
I mean, I did want to say.
Now I can't hear anything.
Oh, okay. Now we
is
can talk
embarrassing.
shit. Well, I would just like, I imagine what it's like to be a young Indian person on the internet. And I remember back in the day, like you wouldn't reveal that you are Indian on the
Yeah.
internet because you'd just be barraged by hateful messages.
Yeah.
But now, I imagine what it would be like if I was young and reading these comments without any pushback and with like thousands upon thousands of likes. So I sort of
Yeah.
feel like, yeah, I discount these losers' opinions, but I feel an obligation to be like, what they're saying is not right, So that's sort of like the balance that I'm trying to walk across, where it's like I want to be a voice, but I don't want to overstay my welcome, if that makes sense.
I don't think I agree with you. It's
Mhm.
not right, but like so much of like what's going on now, I feel like if you're attractive,
Mhm.
you know what I mean? You don't see a lot of the worst of it. But I feel like for those that are unattractive, and I just
Right.
it boils down to suck, honestly. But like it's just worse for folks who are not conventionally attractive. I think whether you're Indian or whatever.
Yeah.
But I see unattractive Indian people have it way worse than
Yeah.
unattractive other people.
Yeah. No, all of us here, we're hot as hell, so we don't have anything.
So hot.
Yeah.
I told you I could have Squeex if I wanted.
That's a conversation for a different day. Wait, so can
It's because you called me old.
I'm not gonna.
Drama.
Okay.
How does that make you feel, Dr. K?
It makes me feel alive.
Yeah. Okay. Good.
And
No, well, basically, what we were saying is like the experience that like, do you feel pressure to like, if you see something about the group that you're from, do you feel pressure to like stand up and say, like, you guys are cringe and that's bad, or not so much?
No, I do not feel pressure.
Can you explain why?
What's the purpose of that?
The purpose for that is for like, if another Indian person is watching or in your audience, they would, at least I would hope that the streamer I watch who's we'd go to the same Indian parties or in the same WhatsApp groups and be like, what is being said is not normal. And like, let's not pretend like these stereotypes are harmful and they're bad and they're cringe. And so like, at least I would hope, like if I was a young Indian boy playing Melee and Ball VR and I watched like Squeex and I'd be like, oh man, like it's so like the common rhetoric is so hateful towards people that look like me. At least I can look to Squeex to say that, chastise that's wrong. Because I feel like the silence is like it's almost like it's so weird.
Yeah. So what?
Like even political discourse, Dr. K. Like I'm talking about some fellow streamers on this website. They will say things that are so like regressive. And I don't even get political ever on my stream, but even I am like itching. I'm like, is no one going to say anything about this shit? Don't we? Isn't there a responsibility from one of us to be like, this guy's a dumbass, you know?
And what happens when you do that?
Then people, I feel like, can sigh. Then people are like, oh, thank God, like someone said that. Because otherwise, like, I feel like everyone's such a coward. I feel like it's an act of cowardice. Where like people are looking at their wallet instead of their heart. Sorry to be cringe, but no. So it's not even beneficial to a stream. But it's like someone will spread like some really hurtful, hateful stuff, and everyone will just be like, "Oh, like that's just the name of the game. It's rage bait. He's doing well, view count wise." And it's like, is no one gonna be like, "This guy's an idiot"?
But when you say this guy is an idiot, what does this person do? What does the person that you're addressing do?
They just go, oh, like that's crazy. Nothing. But maybe they're more thoughtful because otherwise they have no pushback whatsoever.
So I think there's absolutely a couple of, I don't know exactly what you and Kruthi talked about, but a couple of things that I would just start with. So the first is that I think that intolerance in general is being selected for on the internet. Right. So like it's just being selected for. So is anti-Indian or anti-South Asian hate increasing? Yes. Is anti-Jew hate increasing? Yes. Is anti-white male hate increasing? Absolutely. Is anti-Christian sentiment increasing? Absolutely. Is anti-liberal sentiment increasing? Yes. Is anti-conservative sentiment increasing? Yes. Right? Like straight people feel persecuted. Gay people feel persecuted. Bi people feel persecuted the most because the gay people that they try to date are really upset that they're, I've seen this firsthand. So I think just intolerance on the whole is increasing.
Sure, but I would say the intolerance isn't equal. I feel like a lot of people who victimize themselves is a response to other people actually being victims. Like, for example, like straight, like, do you remember like people would say all lives matter in response to Black Lives Matter? You can say, oh, look, there's intolerance towards other people, but it's not. What I'm trying to say is inequality shouldn't be a catch-all term for everybody. Like there are certain people who are persecuted more than.
I'm not saying that it's equal. I'm just saying that intolerance on the whole is rising.
Sure.
Right. So it is a global thing.
Yeah.
Now, and I'm all for. I mean, I don't know if I'm about to step into politically hot water here, but I think like when we say save the rainforest, it's not like we're saying screw all the other trees. It's that this particular set of trees is being destroyed at a rate that is greater than the other trees.
To save the rainforest is what about not all rainforests?
Right. So save all trees, like, which I think is a good sentiment. And I think part of the reason that all lives matter sentiment is so big is because we don't acknowledge a lot of the hardships that majorities oftentimes face. Right. So and this is where the inequality piece comes in. But you say these people get screwed more than those people. That's really hard. It's a really hard stance to take. Like just because more people get diagnosed with breast cancer than testicular cancer doesn't mean that we should screw all the people with testicular cancer, right? Like they deserve care too. There's a certain, and I have personally, I have no idea how to measure or quantify the degree of inequality.
Yeah. Well, I mean, right? I feel like there has to be sort of a judgment call though. Like I'm saying, like some
Okay.
people literally
Right.
can't get like healthcare.
So,
like
and how do you make, what are the variables that go into that judgment?
who's elected into office.
Okay. What else? And how do
Public
you, like,
sentiment.
what's the equation?
Public sentiment plus who's elected into
Hold on, how do you
office,
define public sentiment?
like who people vote for.
Okay.
Yeah.
So you're using voting in one country,
hmm
and what else is a variable in the equation?
Laws being passed.
Okay. What about Twitter posts?
Twitter posts. Yeah, Twitter posts. If there's
Which
no
Twitter
pushback,
posts?
like
Right.
people who are being like hurtful to any group.
Right. So how do you quantify, how do you know which group gets the most hate on Twitter? And then do you also include Reddit? Do you also include
Yeah.
Instagram? How do you quantify those things?
What shows up on my feed, I guess. But I feel like it's a very common thing. Like I
Hold
don't
on.
think
This is exactly the problem. Right. So I think, and there's data to support this, that I think we're not living in the same world. That's why intolerance is increasing, because no one is living with the same set of information. Like everyone is living with their personally constructed. So this is a huge problem. Like, this is why the world is going to hell. We all have a cognitive bias. We all have a tendency towards narcissism. Now what's happened is that the external world used to be the same. And the only reason that we disagree, so like, let's say you and I are roommates, and I'm like, hey, Squeex, you need to do the dishes more. And you're like, I do dishes more than 50% of the time.
Yeah.
The dishes in the sink are a fixed variable that both of us are, there's one reality, but there's different cognitions that shape that reality. Now, even the sensory input that people are getting is drastically different. You asked me a question, hey, are you seeing a bunch of anti-South Asian hate on Twitter? And I was like, I don't use Twitter. So now we've got, not only do we have a fractured reality, reality plus cognitive bias, plus a internet that selects for emotional and engagement, not truth, not equality.
I just feel like people don't have that savviness. I think people are on Twitter and people are seeing it because what's pushed to the top is intolerance.
Yeah.
So that's where my dilemma starts.
Sure. So you asked me a question. I think your original question was, I forget what your original question was.
It was basically like, have you seen a rise in South Asian
So I think
hate?
intolerance on the whole is increasing. I'm sure that there is some way of measuring the degree of inequality that people face. I'm sure that there's some way, but that variable is like fucking complex, very complex. How do you weight number of dick pics sent and sexual harassment versus unfair custody agreements in divorce? How do you weight those two variables? Those are both realities. How do you rate female harassment of using voice comms in online video games against false accusations of sexual assault that are not innocent until proven guilty? It's usually guilty until proven innocent, and even then the damage is done. I don't know how to weight those two variables against each other. I don't know. And a lot of people can have a lot of strong thoughts about, okay, but these people are suffering more. I have some intuitive judgments that I don't think racism is equal across the world. I do think some people suffer more from racist attitudes than others. I do think South Asian hate is on the rise. We're in a really dangerous spot in the United States.
Yeah.
And I think the number one reason for that is because there has been a strong selection bias of South Asians to the West, a huge problem of brain drain. When I was in my intern orientation at Massachusetts General Hospital and Harvard Medical School, there were 150 people in the room. 40 to 50 of them were South Asian.
Yeah.
And this is an institution that is liberal. This is an institution that absolutely accounts for race. This is an institution that is trying to implement DEI. And this is an institution, if you look at like, MCAT scores, if you're brown, you have to score 15 to 20% higher than the average student in order to get into medical school. And we're still overrepresented, which I think is good. I think like the situation there was good. So I think that we've got a target on our back the way that Jews had a target on their back in Nazi Germany, which was that we're economically very successful. And so that, like, it's easy to classify us like Indian doctors, right? Ha ha ha. But I think that hate is coming for sure. And even I don't have to be on Twitter to like know that. So I think the hate is real. The discrimination is real. My attitude towards it is, first of all, I think it's like there's a lot of shaky ground from a logic or intellectual standpoint about inequality of hate. Because I really want to know, like, how do you like, if you're saying that South Asians get more hate than white people, I need to see data to support that, for me to support that conclusion. I think so is not something I'm willing to accept, because the world that you perceive is different from the world that other people perceive. You may not be privy to all of the anti-white hate. You won't be, by definition. That doesn't even include cognitive bias.
Sure.
So now this goes back to your original question of like, do I feel motivated to act and defend? No, because I think that doesn't solve the problem. I think that makes the problem worse, usually. I'm not saying that there isn't a role of activism, or there isn't a role. I'm glad that people do that. And I am the beneficiary of people who advocate on my behalf. So I had a friend growing up, and then we sort of not parted ways. We went down different paths. We were like friends in like middle school and high school. And then he sort of went like the activist route. And then I went the yoga route. So we're both Hindu, but we're very different kinds. And I'm grateful that he does all of this like activism work, because I'm the beneficiary of people who open their mouths and combat this stuff, right? So I'm not saying it's bad. But if you're asking me, what do? I think that this is where, like, what I've learned is, first of all, understanding where other people are coming from is a really, really big step. I think that's what's deficient. We spend way too much time trying to convince people of our point of view instead of understanding theirs. And I think that, like, even with the stuff like Israel and Palestine and, like, Gaza and all this kind of mess, like, I mean, I don't follow drama, but all of this stuff between Ethan Klein and Hassan has, like, even crossed my feed. It's so prevalent. Yeah. And these guys used to host a podcast together. And, like, what the hell happened there?
That was a content nuke. And now there's radiation coming off, and we're all experiencing it. It's on everyone's feed.
Right, but I mean, I think it's shocking that these two people used to be friends, used to be allies, and there's an issue that is so divisive that it's torn them apart and turned them into bloodthirsty enemies. And what I think is really fascinating from, like, I don't even know what the term is, a societal perspective, psychological perspective, is no wonder things are so bad there. Right. We saw it happen in front of our own eyes, that two people were hosting a podcast together. And this conflict is so difficult and so intractable that it tears these two people apart. And now they're like mortal enemies. And we saw it happen. If anyone is wondering, why is Gaza a mess? Like, just look at this. What the hell happened there? For me, the solution, and this is also where my skill set is to understand that. Right, to understand, because I think generally speaking, when someone is really pissed off, and I mean, I deal with a ton of racism. I've dealt with racism since I was growing up in the medical school admissions process, like all kinds of ways. I was at an airport in this one city in Texas. There were 120 people in line for security. 2 cops walk past 62 people to me, the brown person, and pull me out for a random security.
Classic. Screen. Yeah.
Right. Yeah. And, like, but I'm not upset by that. It's, like, okay. Like, and I think here's another big thing that I think a lot of people, like, have a lot of difficulty with. I think most people do the best that they know how to do. I think most people who are racist, this is not a problem of, like, hatred. It's a problem of ignorance. Because if you sit down and you talk to these people, like, why do you think all these Indian people are bad? Like, what's wrong? Like, I mean, I've had people, there's different kinds of racism. So South Asians also receive, like, model minority racism. where it's like Asian kids are good at math. So if you're the one kid, not the one kid, if you're one of the 50% of the population who's not good at math, you get judged incredibly harshly.
Yeah, true.
Right?
Yeah.
And I mean, we joke about it, but at the very beginning, you're like, you can call me Dr. Squeex. Everyone makes memes about how we're the same person.
Yeah.
But there's an undercurrent of truth there where there's some subconscious assignment to value that I went to Harvard Medical School and you didn't. Like, it's nuts.
Yeah.
It's crazy.
It's crazy. I mean, so like, that's why, and forgive me for pushing back a little. I'm just a little confused. I'm a little confused on some of what you've said, specifically like, so you started off by saying that you, you know, first, you're not going to accept that there's a rise of inequality without data. That you also have to look at, you know, different other groups and stuff like that, which is fair, and I can accept that. But what I'm confused is then later you acknowledge there is a rise of intolerance, and then you say we shouldn't do anything because
No, I didn't say we shouldn't do anything.
But or like you feel no obligation to speak out. Or can you help me understand?
No, so we got to be precise with our language.
Yeah, I want to be. That's why I don't want to mischaracterize what you're saying.
So I didn't say we shouldn't do anything. I'm doing a lot.
Okay,
but I'm just not doing what you asked for. Do you think you should do this thing, which is speak out against them? I have not seen that to be the most effective tool at my disposal. So I don't do that because I think generally speaking, when someone comes at you with a racist remark or calling, like people fucking call each other out all the time. Like this person is calling out this person, it's not clear to me that has any positive effect.
So then what does have a positive effect? Like what have you found to be a net positive?
So let me think. Can I think for a second?
Yeah, of course.
I think if you can teach people to be better humans, these problems will get way better in general. So I think if you look at problems like racism, they are born out of, in my opinion, ignorance, not always ignorance. Sometimes there is malice that is based on negativity, like hurt people, right? So it's like, it's really easy to say, oh, like, you know, Indian people have it or South Asians have it worse or Black people have it worse than white people. But it's really hard for a white person who is now unemployed because of something and they're hurting in some way and they direct their malice towards a group of other people.
Yeah.
And I think we see this a lot with like the DEI stuff, right? So like, and I think it's scary, you know, the results of this election, I think, speak to a silent majority, which I saw back in 2016, by the way, that there's a group of people who not being given the opportunity to air their grievances.
Yes.
So when men say I'm having it tough, the most common response is you have it better than women, which doesn't do anything to improve that man's situation.
Sure.
And oftentimes when we look at things like male privilege, when we talk about male privilege, there are absolutely some statistical things where men are privileged 100%. But oftentimes those statistics, if we look at things like, you know, average income, a lot of the reason that the income is that way is because there is a small group of people who earn a ton.
Sure.
And I don't know if you're how into statistics you are, but you know, the whole point.
I worked in finance.
Yeah. So mean and median, right? What's the difference?
Yes.
Median is less resistant to outliers. But when people talk about income equality, no one is talking about median. Everyone's talking about mean. So we're literally, the statistical methods that we are using open ourselves up to outliers. So when you've got like, you know, the like Mark Zuckerberg, Jeff Bezos, like Bill Gates, Warren Buffett, and Elon Musk, right? When you've got those like 5 dudes at the top, how much are they skewing things? And this is what you see as a psychiatrist. Like, I see men getting fucking dumpstered right, left, and center. It doesn't mean that women aren't getting dumpstered too.
I agree. I mean, I just feel like just the framing of the conversation is adversarial. It's like you're almost saying like women do well or men do well.
Right.
And I can imagine being a man who got unemployed and is being told he's a piece of shit would feel horrible. Like, that's not what you want to hear.
Right. So I
right?
don't think that
I completely understand.
I don't believe, I mean, so it's not that it isn't effective. I shouldn't say that. I don't know how to engage in that kind of action in what I believe to be a highly effective way. I could call people out right, left, and center. Like, I think people do stupid shit all the time.
But do you not feel like someone watching you would be like, oh, thank God he said something?
Sure, of course.
So isn't that a net positive?
No. I think validating the feelings of someone in your audience does not necessarily make the world a better place. This is a huge mistake that we've made recently. We've started confusing being offended with being injured. And we've started emphasizing validation over improvement. What everyone wants to hear right now is like, so I learned this lesson when I was talking to someone at MIT Security. So like back when I was working in emergency rooms, right? So one day, like a patient came in who was a student at MIT, and we were just talking, like either they came with MIT Security and everything was kind of sorted out. So I was just hanging out with the guy. And we talked a little bit about safety. And he's like, my job is not to make people feel safe. It's to make people safe. There's a big difference. So I think some of these subtleties have completely been lost. What everyone is looking for is validation. What I think is actually really scary is when people don't get validated, they will engage in a new form of bullying, which is called cancel culture. When you say something that doesn't make me feel good, I feel offended. That's not the same as injured, right? When you say something that is contrary to the worldview that I hold, I demonize you and I'm going to bully you into shutting the fuck up. We see this a lot. And I'm not saying that cancel culture doesn't have good attributes to it.
Yeah.
But like, you know, one of the things that really, and I'll give you a simple example. I know you've got a response, but so sometimes I'll do interviews with people who are considered toxic. And those are some of the best conversations I've had. Sure. And what really blows my mind is when I tell people, yeah, I worked in a jail for 3 months. Everyone is like, "Arey wow, look at you doing, working, served and working with all these criminals. It's such a noble thing."
Yeah, you're right.
Like, I've worked with people who are not accused rapists, who are convicted rapists. And working with a convicted rapist makes me a hero, but talking to an accused rapist makes me a villain? Like, what?
Right.
So I think that there's a lot of just weird, like, cognitive stuff going on. And for me, it's like having conversations with people, increasing understanding is sort of like the avenue that I take. And recognizing that really most people are doing, and this is like, I mean, it's a little bit stupid, honestly, but it's what I choose to believe. Most people are basically doing the best that they can.
Sure.
Right? So when someone is racist, I mean, I'm sure that there's a group of those people who like very actively choose to be racist, but I would say the majority of them, I mean, this is my lived experience, like growing up in Texas, like, you know, and dealing with I mean, we didn't eat beef growing up.
Yeah.
Or not much anyway. And so like I got, you know, they're like, "Oh, I'm eating your God. Ha ha ha."
Classic.
And they just don't understand, you know, like these kids are ignorant.
Yeah.
And even people who are like the most toxic people on the planet oftentimes have histories of trauma, right? The toxicity is born from somewhere. And there's, I mean, some subset of people who are probably sociopaths who maybe are really born with it, but like that's a very small percentage of the population, definitely less than 5%. So I think there's all kinds of like weird trends in embracing fragility. There's like weird, you know, differing realities at play.
Sure.
All kinds of cognitive bias. And, you know, when I call someone out for something, all it does is galvanize the people that support me and entrench the people that oppose me. But I don't, I mean, I think that it's creating more of an antagonistic and polemic environment where in order for one person to win, the other person has to lose. And that's what we're seeing.
It just feels like it's such a, what you're saying makes complete sense. And it sounds very like noble, but when the other side is being so antagonistic, to meet that with no friction whatsoever seems to me like lazily pacifist. That's
Sure.
where like, so, and then like what I would also say is, you know, you mentioned that, you know, your people, you know, you say fragility and people aren't being targeted. It's like, you know, what's the end result of targeted hate is violence.
Okay.
Is that incorrect? Like, look at, you know, I'm just saying, like, if there's a group that is being so targeted, I'm not even saying South Asians. We could talk about many minorities or even white people. I just think that there should be a guiding voice, and maybe not even calling people out, just saying like, hey, like this isn't a normal thing to say.
Okay. So let me ask you this. What's been your experience?
With what specifically?
So when you say like, you know, targeted hate results in violence,
Yeah.
that's something that that we need friction, that there is a lazy pacifism,
Yeah.
in my view. So like, help me understand that. I'm not, don't walk back your words.
I'm not walking back my words. So,
but like, I really want to understand, you know, why you think I'm a lazy pacifist. I'm totally fine with that.
oh, no, I'm not calling you a lazy
Okay.
pacifist. I didn't mean it in that way. What I'm
Okay.
trying to say is I'm very prone. I myself am the lazy pacifist, but what I'm trying to say is if people on the common conversation becomes like, fuck this group of people, like you can say any group of people, you could say Jews, you could say Palestinians, you can say Indians, you can say Pakistanis. And if everyone is sharing that view and it's being pushed to the top of algorithms, then then what I find is there's this sort of implicit acceptance by not speaking out against it. And that
Okay.
there's a responsibility that people have to say, no, you know what? I'm not going to be meeting that vitriol with vitriol. I think that's wrong. You know, like I think that's an incorrect stance to have. And let me explain to you why. And, you know, try to have a conversation with people. And I think that is very responsible. But for a long time, you know, you hear people being so vitriolic and hateful. And for a long time, you know, I've sat on my hands and I still sort of sit in my hands because I'm like, I don't want to engage in that sort of stuff because it's bad for business. Or it's, you know, I don't want to come off in a certain way. But I'm trying to say is like I do inside feel a responsibility to call out bad ideas or hateful ideas.
What happened, Squeex, in your life that triggered the desire for this conversation?
Nothing specifically targeted towards me, funny enough. It's just what happened is I just remember what it's like to be a kid and seeing an injustice that adults aren't talking about. But it's funny. It's crazy. I feel I haven't been targeted at all. At all. Like I am not the victim in this whatsoever, but I do feel there is a targeting towards South Asian people. And so I feel like, you know, inside I'm, you know, 40% South, 40% Indian and 60% speedrunner. But that 40% is like ringing the bell. Like you can't let them say this to you. Like you can't let them say this to to your group.
What makes you feel that way?
I'm not sure. I'm not sure.
What was when you say you said something about, you know, people standing by while injustice was being done?
Mm-hmm.
Is that something that you experienced?
Like personally, not really. But I see it on the internet.
And what bothers you about that?
What bothers me is that it feels like it's changing how people talk about topics. And I feel like that can often lead to just a more like hateful society. And I think that's like the injustice that I'm talking about. Like it just doesn't sit with me right.
What bothers you about it?
I think the injustice of it bothers me about it. Like people aren't being looked at by their merits but rather people are coming in with their preconceived notion of people. And growing up, if you're a kid and you hear people say like Indian people are, soy, whatever. I don't know. Obviously, it doesn't affect me, but for the kid that hears that, it will almost make sure they turn out to be a loser. It's like a self-fulfilling prophecy. If everyone in their life is like, you're a fucking dweeb, you're a, whatever, Indian people work in the telemarket, whatever. But I'm trying to say is like, I want for that kid listening to be like, that's not true. You can be awesome. Bindis are awesome. Diwali is better than Christmas. Like, I want to just be like the voice of people being like, have your dal chawal. It's cooler than a ham sandwich, but you don't hear that voice on the internet. And so that's sort of where I come from, if that makes sense.
Why don't you hear that voice on the internet?
No Browns. I think there's a lot of people. It's like, I'll draw an analogy if you don't mind. Let me know if it's too contrived. Okay. But I used to work in investment banking, and there was a lot of men, a lot of like, classic banking men, and the women that would be promoted were like trying to fit the mold of a man. Like, it was like, look, we have very masculine women because that's the traits that we select for. In the same way with streaming, what I've realized is a lot of the traits that are selected are very cookie cutter, are very like, so like a lot of Indian people often can't succeed because of their brownness. Like, and and I hate to, this is just absolutely anecdotal, but it's just like a lot of Indian streamers, Dr. K, in the past would not use face cams because there was a fear of what people would say because they're brown. And I think that's bullshit, and that pisses me off because being Indian's awesome.
How has being Indian affected you?
In massive ways. Like, I feel like I grew up with extremely rich culture. I'm very close to my family. I'm just a regular Desi boy. I grew up in Mumbai. I love Bollywood. I love the music, the food, and I want to share it with people. And so like, I don't know, like I have a, Ludwig and Pokey, we watched Kabhi Khushi Kabhi Gum. It was a dream come true. And I imagine being a young brown Indian Squeex being like, bro, Pokemon and Ludwig watching Kabhi Khushi Kabhi Gum is mind boggling. So like, I just imagine like stuff that I do to introduce Indian culture to the wider arena of streamers it's very fulfilling. So when I see hate for the same minority of Indian cultures, I feel like if I'm here to celebrate all the great parts, I have to call out some of the bullshit too.
Why don't you?
Oh, I do.
Okay.
I do. But
what do you say?
It's like, if some streamer or someone says some stupid shit, or if I read something on the internet, I'm like, I get involved.
And how do you do that?
Oh, I call them a fucking idiot.
Is that really along the lines of what you say?
Yeah, pretty much.
I mean, help me understand the connection between being an investment banker and being brown.
Oh, well, I wasn't making the direct connection. I was just saying, like, in the same way.
I know. I mean, for you, like, what was that journey like?
It was what we call brown investment bankers or failed doctors. You know what I mean, Dr.
Yeah.
K? We call them second string. No, it was like, I think a lot of Indian culture focuses on hard work. And almost like the way I describe it to my friends is like, there's a suffer currency in terms of employment where it's like, if you really hate your job and you're suffering, a lot of Indian people would be like, yeah, that's the cost of it. Like that's so good. And so that's sort of the link between like, oh, investment banking is so miserable, but that's why it's revered in a way.
Yeah. So let me just see if I'm understanding you. So sure. You see a lot of anti-South Asian hate.
Mm-hmm.
You can imagine, so you feel hurt by that.
Yeah. I personally, like, not to my own self, but I feel hurt thinking about someone else seeing that hate. Like, I feel a responsibility more than hurt. Does that make sense?
Yeah, that makes sense. But I'm confused about how you can connect those two dots, right? So generally speaking, when we feel empathy for someone else's hurt, that's rooted in our own experience in some way. So how do we know that getting hit in the nuts hurts? Like, because we've been hit in the nuts before, right? How do we know that heartbreak hurts? Because we've been there and we know how it sucks.
Yeah.
So what I'm curious about is like, what was your experience with South Asian hate?
Sure. I would love to get into that. I mean, I just know when I was younger, and it's something that we sort of take for granted, speaking on the DEI stuff, a lot of people don't know, and please share with me your experiences. When you don't see people that look like you on TV or represented in media or anything, it's like, you feel a little isolated. Like there's no, like whenever there's an Indian person in a movie, it's like a classic, like, hello, how are you? Like Peter Sellers in The Party. But, the fact that I'm granted, I'm so fortunate to have a platform. I'm like, hopefully I represent Indian people well, because growing up, we didn't have any good representation. That's why we just retreat into our, kuch kuch hota hai and stuff.
And
in American Western culture, at least.
And when people direct the South Asian hate that you see, what do they say? Like, what is their representation of South Asians? Like, what do they think about?
It's like they call like they're like smelly, dirty people, and like, and they're like, they're not very like refined. Like terrorists, dirty, stuff like that. Call center worker. Like it's just like soy. Like I heard this thing where it's like, oh, like Indian people are physically built in a different way. It's like, yeah, motherfucker, we're on our computers. Like, yeah, what the fuck do you mean?
So this may sound kind of weird, but like everything that you said is pretty consistent with some of my experience.
With Indian people?
Yes.
Yes.
So for example,
can I interject really quick with what you said? Yes, but what you're saying is not coming from a place of vitriol. When someone says that sort of the same sort of thing on the internet where it is trying to be hateful, that's where I take offense to it. Like I have friends who I love to introduce them to Indian culture, and they will poke fun, but it comes from a place of love.
So I think there's
from a place of hate.
Yeah. So I think there are a couple things here. One is like, what's your goal? Is it to stop the hate, or is it to bolster the person who feels attacked by the hate?
Yeah, to bolster the person. What do you mean by bolster?
Like, so you're saying that when you speak out in favor of something, and you say dal chawal is great, or there's representation because like, if I'm brown, I can be a Twitch streamer. Like I don't have to be a doctor or an investigator. There's like, there's third string.
No, that's like 90th string, Dr. K.
Or first.
That's like coming out of the closet for Indian people.
No, I mean,
like, Dad, I'm a content creator.
Honestly, it's probably starter nowadays.
Yeah.
So I think there's, and so where do you think the malice comes from?
The malice of the person posting?
Yeah.
I think as you said, I think you put it really well. It comes from a place of ignorance, but it also comes from a place of like, this is what does well on the internet, so I'm going to spew that sort of stuff.
Okay. So I think there are a couple of things here. One is so I think if you want to speak up, and I'm in favor of that, right? So like, we'll post like some pictures to our socials when we celebrate like holidays like Diwali. Like we'll do that, and I think it's fine. I'm not, I think celebrating our culture is awesome.
Sure.
And that's something that I do just about every time I show up anywhere publicly. I celebrate my roots in some way. So I think that the first thing is that, the way that I try to approach this problem, and I'll first caveat is that I'm the beneficiary of people who do things that are not my way. So there are people who are like my buddy who will advocate so that when there's a textbook that says this person is a Brahmin and has a picture of a mullah, like they're like, hey, you can't, this is wrong, right?
Yeah.
This is not factually correct. Like if you want to talk about Brahmins, at least put the right picture in there. So I'm the beneficiary of people who do advocacy work. So I'm not saying that my way is the best way or the only way, or even necessarily a good way. So I think that for a kid who is listening to this stuff, who is listening to hate and feels attacked to say something that bolsters that person's confidence, helps them not feel alone, I think that's fantastic. Right. So like, hey, like like we should sell. So if your culture is being attacked, your culture can also be celebrated. And that's one way to balance those two things out. I think that's fantastic because I think it doesn't engage in this entrenchment and intolerance. It's not so much about saying that this person is wrong. It is about showing this person another version of reality where like there are parts of you that you don't have to be ashamed of. Right. So I think that's fantastic. All for it. I think I try to do that in some ways. So speaking of representation, right. So that's where like, I mean, that's something I take very seriously about. And it's not just representing South Asian. So I try to represent psychiatrists that have a really bad, I mean, when I was in med school, you know, one of my surgery attendings was like, you should not do psychiatry. And I was like, why not? And he's like, you're too smart to be a psychiatrist. I was like, what does that mean?
Right. You want to select for dumb psychiatrists? It's crazy.
So I try to be a representative of the things that I believe in, which is being South Asian, which is being a man, which is being someone who is spiritual or religious, which like, I think it's totally fine. There's a rise of atheism, but there's also, I mean, I think that's a good thing.
Yeah.
But there's also a rise of anti-religiosity, specifically in academic institutions. So if you're like religious, you're looked down upon in higher levels of academia because you're like, and because that's religious people have gotten have formed an association of being stupid and anti-science. Like those two things have been associated. So I think being a form of representation to support certain ideas that there is anti-sentiment towards. So I think being a man is another good example of like, there's so much anti-masculine hatred out there. I think a lot of I understand. I think a lot of it is in a sense justified because I think these people, they're not born hating men. It's that when you're 9 years old and you start to get sexualized and you get sent dick pics like every week from random people when you're 13, 14, 15, 16, 17, when you've got a TA or a professor who, tells you they've got like, it's like really hard to like when you're a woman and you open your mouth on voice chat, it's really hard to not be scarred by your experiences with men. And also like, when they say something that is hateful towards men, I think arguing with them about not all men doesn't serve the purpose.
No, definitely not.
Right. It doesn't, it gets people angry on both sides. I think the attitude that I take is that I'm happy to be a man. I'm happy to cuddle with my kids. I'm happy to work for my wife. Like that doesn't threaten my masculinity. And it's like, she's better at that job and I'm better at this job. And that's why we do it that way. And so I think that I think representation, positive representation, I'm all in favor of. And I think that's in a sense, the right direction. That's the one really positive direction that I can totally get behind. So I think celebrating Dal Chawal, sort of saying that like, like Indian food is great, is good. I think also some of these things around, body types being different, it's not because we're in front of a computer all day. Like our fat ratios are the percentage of body fat that we hold on to as brown people, like our musculature and body fat percentages are not what is traditionally aesthetic.
Yeah, but then fucking Kumail Nanjiani got so ripped, and now we're all weak compared to him.
It's way harder for the average person to get ripped than it is for other ethnicities.
Sure.
And that has to do with our metabolism. We also have really bad heart disease, despite the fact that we do not have a lot of the high risk parts of diet for heart disease. We do have a lot of other ones, but we literally have like small vasculature. So there's a cardiologist down in Florida who specifically practices cardiology for Indian people because our vasculature is different. So physiologically, we are different. It's hard for us to be sexy in the way that is traditionally sexy in our media right now. And sure, you can do it, or some of us can do it.
Thanks.
But it's hard.
Yeah.
Right. So I think a lot of those like racist things I think make sense. I mean, but I think that the attitude, like, so for example, Indian people smelling bad, like I hate to say this, but I used to make fun of people who were from India smelling bad.
Because we eat such insanely masala'd food.
That's part of it. Like my wife and I will be more careful about one of my daughter's hygiene because if she eats certain kinds of food, she gets this genetic BO, man. Like it's like a thing. Right. So now when I have, people who come over from India, I'll have a compassionate but focused conversation with them about hygiene, because hygiene standards are cultural. It doesn't mean that they're pathetic, but there are differences in hygiene. I don't know how things are now, but 20 years ago, there was there was a difference. And I remember when my dad would also have 20 years ago, I don't know, 30 years ago, I don't know if deodorant was available in India. I don't know if people use deodorant. Right. So when people would, and I'm not trying to say that Indian people are inherently smelly. I think the hygiene and, like you said, the food will, our sweat releases certain compounds in the same way that we can have garlic breath or onion breath. Right. So we exert volatile compounds from our lungs after we eat our garlic and onions. And there are certain things that come out of the sweat and give us like a funky BO.
Sure.
And it's the price we pay for delicious food.
Yeah. I just feel like there's what you're saying is so right, and it really rings true to me. But there's a line between this and can you say this? It's almost like you can say every racial stereotype is rooted in some truth. Are you willing to say that?
I wouldn't. I not every. I mean,
okay,
the
but
moment that you get
a lot
every.
of. But I just feel like it gets it. We're almost like Douglas Murray posting. we're
I don't know who that is.
It's just this guy who talks about genetic differences and ethnicities, and we can talk about Indian genetic differences because of our context, but I'd feel vastly uncomfortable if I was talking to Ludwig and he's like, bro, Indian people smell like shit.
Yeah.
you
know
what I mean?
I think that's a social rule that we have.
Yeah.
That if something is true about Indian people, we are allowed to say it and other people aren't.
Correct.
Which is, I think, is sort of I'm this is shaking ground here, but I think it confuses me. So something is true, but only some people are allowed to speak the truth, and you're allowed to speak the truth based on your race.
This is definitely...
this is where I think there's a lot of intellectual laziness here, and I think your point about malice is a really good one, because I think what happens is a lot of people will pretend to be truth seekers but have malice. They're like, oh yeah, it's true, right? But
I'm just doing research into this, but it's you have some agenda, obviously.
So I think you can say something that is true from a non-malice perspective or from a malice perspective.
Sure.
You can make comments that are factually correct. And I think this is where there's a lot of intellectual laziness.
Yeah.
Because if you say that there are more black people, the percentage of black people in prison in the United States outweighs the percentage of the population, that is a factually true statement. I've seen that. When I was working in the jail, it took me 3 weeks to see a white person. I didn't even realize it until I was in week 3, and I was like, wait, something's different.
Yeah.
Oh, I saw a white person for the first time. It's like, holy shit. That's when it hit me. I really didn't understand that statistic until I was I'm in Boston.
Yeah.
Irish center of the United States. I mean, maybe not center. I'm sure other cities will disagree with that. But so many Caucasian people, I didn't see a single white person until a single white patient. Guards were all white. But, so I think those statements are factually true, but I do not think that means black people are criminals. I think that criminal behavior has certain systemic things, that desperation and poverty induce criminal behavior. Those are the two biggest things. So it's not that, so I think there's a lot of nuance here that's lost. And especially on the internet, when people are so reactive, and what people do is they judge based on their preconceived notions. They don't try to understand. They don't try to give people the benefit of the doubt.
Right.
So I'm kind of going all over the place, but I think that
totally makes sense.
So I wouldn't say that every racial stereotype is true, but I would say that human beings have a brain that forms patterns out of data. And before we say that those patterns are true, this same pattern generating machine can look at a cloud and see a bunny. There's no bunny there. Our pattern generating apparatus is not a one-to-one indicator of truth by any means. And I think our cognitive bias is actually in some way, so when you say, is every stereotype based in truth? I think the majority of stereotypes that we have are probably based in some truth. But I think if we look at some racism, like Indians are smart, That is not a factually true statement. Indians make good doctors is not a factually true statement. And the reason that people believe that is because there is a selection process where we're taking the top 5% of Indians and we're moving them from India to the United States where they all become doctors.
Yeah.
So it's not factually true. So like, I think that I wouldn't agree with that statement, but I think that a lot of the ethnic and racial stereotypes that we have, even though it's not factually true at that level, it is not surprising that if you're like a Caucasian person who grows up in the United States and 50% of your doctors are Indian, you would think that Indians are like into medicine. Like that's true.
Sure. Yeah.
So I think that's also where like when we say, okay, is this true or not true? It's like, it depends on how you cut the pie.
Yeah. But it's almost like it's almost like completely like it's if people are speaking with malice, regardless if it's true or not, the malice is still the same.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? So like, yeah, I completely agree with you. But you know, my thing is like when people speak with malice on anything related to South Asians or whatever.
So now the question becomes, so you said that you want to speak up for the sake of the person who's getting like collateral damage from the internet-based malice, right? Fair enough. So what's your plan to deal with the malice? You don't have to have one, but I'm just curious, like, what do you think? Because you're saying that, you know, malice is like, it's not the statement itself, right? There's a way in which that statement can be true. There's a way in which that statement can be false. We are allowed to make that statement and it's okay because of our race, right? So we can, and just literally, I mean, there's like literally words
we feel
in
like,
the English
hello,
language.
nice to see you.
There are words in the English language that we're allowed to say or not say, depending on what the color of our skin is.
Sure.
So what I'm curious about is like, when it comes to malice, what do you think we should do about that?
That's where I'm like tricky, where I'm like, I don't want to be the guy. You know, I don't want to be like the guy who's, you know, who seems preachy or anything, or like social justice-y, you know, stereotype. But I also don't want to seem like someone who's just lets bad, like hateful ideas live on. So like, that's where I'm not sure, to be honest. I don't know.
Yeah. So I mean, that's sort of like, I think the right way to deal with that, or not the right, my way of dealing with that, and the way that I deal with that is also based on my skill set, right? So it's not what is most objectively effective. It's that with these two hands, what can I do? And I think it's having conversations with people. And I think that the challenging thing for me is that I do think that's the right move. I think there's plenty of data to support that. And also having conversations with people who are perceived as toxic is a very dangerous game to play. I'm not even allowed to talk to those people.
Yeah.
Right. So you can't engage with them. And so it's kind of like, if there's no like option for diplomacy, your only option is war. And that I don't think is good. So I think that really like understanding and listening to these people. So I've worked with a lot of like incels and red pillars who are just like filled with a lot of hatred. But I think what they're missing, especially like if you look at toxic, the area that I know the best is toxic masculinity. And usually the people who are toxically masculine were like, you know, they're a product, just like Black people being in jail is a product of their circumstances. I think most people who are toxically masculine are a product of their circumstances.
For sure. I feel like everyone's a product of their circumstances.
That's what we know from psychiatry and trauma and developmental psychology. Yeah. And that goes back to this other statement of, I think most people are doing the best that they can. I think most people are doing. So I have a friend that I play Dota with who makes racist comments. I think it's the stupidest shit in the world. But he just doesn't know better. Like he doesn't like grasp that this is wrong. Yeah. And I remember working with an esports professional who told me the same thing. He was like, you know, he blew up when he was like 15. And when you're, you know, I'm not a professional gamer, but you start out playing games, like racism and misogyny and things like that are like commonplace. And someone had to sit him down over the course of a couple of years and really talk to this kid about like why this is not okay. And this does hurt people. And he doesn't understand that because he grew up in a small town and, you know, a part of North America that like, he just didn't encounter these people. He didn't understand that it was hurtful. So a lot of that positive guidance is lacking. Yeah. So my approach is talk to people. And usually when you meet people with compassion, you'll be amazed at like what you put out is usually what you receive. So if you go people hard, they'll entrench. If you approach people with compassion, many of them will offer you the same respect.
Sure.
And if you really try to understand where their views come from, I've seen a couple of really surprising things, which makes sense once you kind of see it. But see, if racism is not correct, if you ask someone to explain it, it'll fall apart.
Yeah.
If you really try to understand, it'll fall apart. And most of the time, people just don't do that. So it's like, oh, like Indian people this way. Like, how do you understand that? You know, like, where does that belief come from? And usually when I do that, like, I'm amazed by how quickly positions that are strongly held will fall apart.
Yes. Can I ask you a question that seems related to this? So one thing that I actually like, I think you did an excellent job explaining like the compassion component of this. Then why are all of the content creators who cover controversial topics and political, how are they so, I can't think of a word. It's almost like a lack of compassion is rewarded. Like
100%.
all the top. So like, how do you engage compassionately when you're on a platform that promotes a lack of compassion?
You
know what I mean? Like if a big
simple.
Okay.
It's simple.
Okay.
You just have to understand. So success on the platform and solving the problem are two very different outcomes.
Sure.
Those are not connected at all. So I am confident that my subscriber count on the internet could be 400% higher if I open my mouth more. I'm like very confident.
We could start alt-right grifting right now, Dr. K. Vivek Ramaswamy 2 and 3. We can go right now. Let's
So this is just where you have to decide what's important to you.
Yeah.
And so speaking of the midlife crisis, this is part of what I was going through, is because I suddenly became arguably, I don't know, but I was having a conversation with my agent about this, the most well-known psychiatrist on the planet. Psychologists, there are more well-known. Psychiatrists, very few. I'm at least in the running. And it's kind of weird. So like once you like hit that, right? So what am I doing? Am I just trying to grow? And then you get into this growth mindset where like you need more numbers and you need more numbers and you need more money and scalability. More. And I intentionally took a step away from a lot of that. And it's like, we're going to make content not because we think it'll be successful. We got a lot of fantastic feedback from our community about our titles and thumbnails. So there's like a balancing between how clickbaity you make something and how like, you know, so there's like, you have to play the game some, but I think that it's like the reason that works is because you're right. That's what platforms select for. Platforms are increasingly dopaminergic. What platforms have figured, I don't know if they figured this out intentionally or they just built algorithms because this is how the human brain works. That when I show you a cat video and then I piss you off and then I make you feel good. And I'm convinced that righteousness is the number one emotion that creates engagement.
Okay.
You have to show someone something that is wrong and you have to make them feel right. This is number one.
Yes.
So I think what happens is when you look at social media, you get righteous, you get angry. This is not right. Something needs to be done. And that's what that's the number one thing that I'm convinced of that.
Yes. Yes. I do have sorry, I know we might be going over, but
that's fine. Go for it.
So what my question wasn't necessarily about like your or my success, but rather if the idea is that you found it effective that compassion is the antidote to people spewing like hateful things to respond to them with compassion and talk to people, then why don't we see compassion rise to the top? And you're saying like dopaminergically, because it's the intolerance that rises to the top.
Yeah.
But so then if I was a new streamer and I'm like, hey, I want to do politics, but I want to listen and talk, then why don't we see that succeed?
Because what's your criteria for success? How do you define success?
Like to be a top, like in the context of Twitch, to be a top political streamer.
Because it doesn't, because people, that's not what people are interested in. People aren't interested in solving problems. People are interested in propagating their belief that they're right.
Okay.
So I don't think, like, I don't know if this makes sense, but, you know, if you've got a clogged toilet,
Uh-huh.
fixing that is not entertaining to anyone. Fixing anything in your life is not
Yeah.
entertaining to anyone.
Mhm.
Improving things is not, generally speaking, entertaining to anyone. What engages people, because this is what we need to understand. I once had a patient who was very successful, but they operated between two poles: absolute panic and relief. There was no room for success. There's no room for pride. So, like, what happens when you solve a problem is it goes away. So all of the people who successfully engage get beat out by the people who are, like, galvanizing support.
Sure. Yeah. I see
Right.
that.
So if you have, like, and this is what it's not just, and I'm sort of on shaky ground here because I haven't looked at this in the political space, but I think you see this all the time in the self-help industry. The
Mhm.
whole reason that the self-help industry is so big is because it doesn't work.
Yeah. Because if
Like,
it worked, you wouldn't be using self-help. You'd be like, I'm done. That was good.
Right. So the self-help industry, and it's really interesting because, like, I've made some pieces of content include, like, doing things like writing a book. And, like, I think that the what people are selecting for is different. So in our human psychology, like, another really good example of this is that, so everyone's unhappy, right? That's the reason for that is because we didn't evolve for happiness. We evolved for survival. Happiness is hard to achieve. What's
Yeah.
way easier to achieve is giving into our baser urges and shooting for survival or worldly success.
Yeah.
That's what we're made for.
For sure.
And if you sort of think about it, right? Like, so human beings were tribal, which means when there's a fight, you need to throw down. And when there's a fight, you need to get behind your leader. It pulls us together. It gives us it enhances that tribalism, but it makes us, we feel under attack. And then then we're going to donate more money and buy your merch.
Yeah.
Right. And that's why, like, you know, sometimes people will ask me, what's the goal? Like, where do I see Healthy Gamer in 5 years? My goal with Healthy Gamer is to shut it down. I'm tired. I mean, not only am I personally tired, but, like, the whole point is for us to be done.
Yeah.
Is for us to, like, leave our community. And sometimes people get upset about that, but we get these fantastic people who be like, hey, like, I stopped watching because my life got better.
Yeah. I don't need
It's
it
like
anymore.
fantastic.
Yeah.
And it's the very opposite of what, you know, a lot of people are trying to engender. Like, no, we want people to fucking move on. So when you solve a problem, the problem ends.
Yeah.
And so I think what starts to happen is that, and this is where we kind of get into this weird, like, validation cycle where people feel bad about something.
Uh-huh.
And then they, like, it's not clear to me that they feel like they want to fix it, but they want to fix it. And we see this all the time in psychiatry. They want to fix it in a particular way. They don't want to do what is necessary to fix it.
Sure.
They want to fix it in this way.
Yeah.
Like, my favorite example of this is people who are addicted to weed. And you can fix all of the problems that weed causes in your life. You just have to stop smoking it. But what they will do is try 1,000 different techniques of, okay, can I use it in this way? Can I use it in this way? Only after 5 p.m., only after I do all my homework, only after this, and, like, these limits and that limit and this limit. And they're just not willing to give something up. And I see that very, very, very strongly in political conflicts.
Yes.
Because what people want is they don't want to compromise.
Yeah.
They want to win.
True. Yes.
So they don't want to solve the problem. They want to win.
That's so true. Even like internet commentators or whatever, political whatever, it feels like they're not even engaging in the issues. They're engaging on dunking on each other. Like, they're not even, the political issue is completely separate to who's winning the conversation almost.
Yes.
It becomes so ideological that it's an ideology battle on people's ideologies. Like, nobody's giving a shit about the real meat and potatoes. It's so
and
funny.
I would even argue that the reason for that is because we can't even grasp the meat and potatoes.
Yes.
So, like, earlier when I asked you, show me the data that quantifies inequality. and everyone is walking around saying my ethnicity is getting hammered more than all of the other ethnicities.
Right.
Including white men. And they have justifiable arguments for that. Right? Like they can point to all of these different studies that show discrimination against white men. There are those studies. So I think that the scale of problems that we're dealing with is not even comprehensible really by the human mind. And we're dealing with a lot of bias. And I think that I'm pretty sure that, I know this is going to sound crazy. I'm pretty sure a lot of the world's problems could be solved if we could remove ego from the equation. Like, I think problems are solvable. It's just, we don't want to, right? We're not, the primary goal is not solving. It's not fixing the problem. It's winning. It's, I want to fix it in this way. And one of the things that I almost never see people do is something called a differential diagnosis. So I love this. Like my favorite thing about being a doctor is that it taught me this one principle, which is that when you have a problem, there are multiple causes and multiple solutions. That's not, everyone's advocating for their solution. And we just don't think like that because it's not how we've evolved to think. We've evolved to think in very rapid ways and very judgmental ways.
Yeah.
And so this is the world that we live in because this is the world that we create.
Sure. No, that makes sense. I think you hit it spot on. I think focusing on not being adversarial, I feel like one thing that I've learned from talking to you is if you meet like a vitriolic comment with the same vitriol, it doesn't solve the problem. Like it's not really beneficial for anybody except for like, sorry.
I mean, I recognize that I said that, but I think there's an important caveat there.
Okay.
It does solve the problem if you're more powerful than the other person.
Can you explain that?
Yeah. So like when you make a vitriolic comment on Twitter and I own Twitter, I can respond to you with vitriol and win. Right? So when there's when there's a fundamental power imbalance, fighting fire with fire works. Or like, my gun is bigger than your gun. So if you come at with me a gun, I'm going to use my gun. So when there's a power imbalance, it works. So let's be clear. I'm advocating for that, but don't think for a second that doesn't work. It does work. This is why empires are built. Like they're built off of the back of war. And like war is like something that humans do. We've always done. So, fighting fire with fire does work if you've got the bigger fire.
Yeah.
I didn't mean to burst your, stop your momentum there, but I do think that's an effective strategy. It's just one that I choose not to employ. And I think that I don't think it's clear that people have, a bigger gun in this scenario.
No. Okay. Interesting. Then I do want to ask you one last question. Are you optimistic about the future?
Define optimistic.
Do you feel like the world is headed towards a place that is progress with a big asterisk? So however you defined progressing forward. So here's a couple of random answers. First is there's a particular Hindu Swami. Or do you identify as Hindu, by the way? Yeah.
Okay. Do you know who Kalki is?
No.
So there's
I know that's a movie, isn't it?
Yeah, there's a movie. So there's a 10th avatar of Vishnu, who's supposed to be Kalki, and Kalki is the destroyer, who brings the end of the world. So he eradicates evil, but also cleanses and maybe destroys the world. It's not entirely clear. So it's really interesting because the apocalypse, unless you're some crazy cult, the apocalypse is something that is far away, right?
Yeah.
So I was there's actually a spiritual teacher who I respect a lot. I won't name them, but who said that Galki was either born or descended onto the planet in 2014. So
Okay.
there's like, there are a couple of other like, these are basically from the Hindu tradition. A couple of people who are saying that like there's some apocalyptic signs.
Mhm.
So it's interesting because, I recognize that most of the people who think the end of the world is coming are crazy.
Mhm.
But I thought it was interesting because there were a couple of people that I respect a lot who were kind of saying like, hey, like this is, there are certain signs of this happening. And so who knows if that's true or not,
Yeah,
but it really
sure.
does make me wonder because I think there's some data to suggest that human beings are at a tipping point and there's a decent likelihood that we won't tip in the right direction. So that climate stuff could really get out of hand and like the world will like end. Like we'll get into this runaway climate disaster scenario, right?
That's
So I know
scary.
there's a lot of dispute over whether that's correct or not
Yeah.
correct or whatever. And a bunch of scientists say it's possible. A bunch of scientists say it's BS, or maybe a bunch of maybe non-scientists say it's BS.
Sure.
So I think that I do think there's something critical happening. Like I know that I imagine that every generation has a cognitive bias that thinks that this is the end of times.
Mhm.
But I do think we have a couple of signs that things are getting objectively more unstable
Sure.
and potentially like catastrophically so. So birth rate declines, changes to our climate, economic stuff, development of AI, right? So there was this idea that human advancement would lead to the betterment of everybody.
Mhm.
But I think what we're seeing is that human advancement is being primarily controlled by some people and everyone else. Like, despite the fact that we can grow enough food to feed everybody on the planet, we still have people who are hungry and we have
Yeah.
people who are struggling to afford food. And we have some people who have a ton of food and a ton of money and things like that. I'm not like anti-capitalist or anything, but I think that there
Sure.
are some objective signs for this stuff.
Yeah.
So I think the end, we really could be at some terminal point. I've seen some arguments for that. And it's not that I believe them or don't believe them. I think that it is a reasonable argument to make.
Interesting.
I also think that, gender dynamics is like at an all-time mess.
Mhm.
Low birth rates, late marriage rates, things like that.
Sure.
So am I optimistic? Not really. But I don't think it matters. So I don't know if this kind of makes sense, but if I'm optimistic or if I'm pessimistic, what difference does that make, Squeex?
Well, I think a lot of people. I'm just curious to know because I think I look up to you as a figure of someone who thinks a lot about this sort of stuff. So it makes a difference in my outlook personally.
What if I told you I was optimistic? What difference would that make?
It'd make me feel happy.
Reassured?
I'd be reassured. Like definitely
Okay.
more reassured about the future because, as you said, there is a lot of instability.
Yeah, so the attitude that I take is that I think the world is fucking falling apart, and we see a lot of indications for that.
Yeah.
But it doesn't give me despair in it, not one iota of despair.
Mhm.
Because I think that if the world is falling apart, whether the world is falling apart or not, the problems certainly exist. Whether it results in total annihilation of all human beings or not, the problem is still there, right? Does that kind of make sense?
Yeah, it makes sense.
And then my relation to the problem is the most important thing,
Mhm.
right? So for the problems that I see in the world, like I have no fucking idea what's going to happen. And I've stopped living my life in that way. People
Yeah.
ask me this question, where do you see Healthy Gamer in 5 years? I say, eventually I'd want to shut down, but the way things are going, that's not going to work. Like I
No.
work more now than I did last year and more last
Yeah.
year than I did the year before. And someone told me that residency was when I was going to be working the most. Not true. I'm working way harder now. It's like, what the fuck?
Yeah. Where's the payoff here?
Right.
Yeah.
So I'm not optimistic about our future, but I think that optimism and pessimism are basically psychological things, right? So like you
Yeah.
should do away with all of it. Don't be optimistic. Don't be pessimistic. There's certain shit in your life and in the world around you that can be immediately affected by you today. And that's what you should do. You should not be affected by the likelihood of success of solving your problem. You should just try to solve your problem, because focusing on whether it will work or not work doesn't help you solve the problem. And in fact, focusing on optimism or pessimism frequently causes problems in both directions. If I'm optimistic, it leads to complacency. If I'm pessimistic, it leads to despair. Neither of those things are going to allow me to be my best self when I'm actually trying to do something.
Sure.
So
Agreed.
I try to just, I don't fucking know, man. And I don't care.
Yeah.
There's problems that need to be done today. That problem is I'm going to have a conversation with Squeex about South Asian hate, because this is what I can do today to make the world a better place.
Sure.
And this is where maybe I'm a little bit arrogant, maybe I'm a cult leader, but I'm pretty sure if like way more people, if 51% of the people on the planet had this attitude, the world would definitely be moving in the right direction.
The attitude being like not optimistic or like,
just focus on fixing the fucking
what's in
problem,
front of you. Yeah.
Not getting complacent because it's being okay, and not getting despair because, you know, like, and it's so many things. It's like, oh, like I got dumped, or like I'm an incel, or like I'm this never. Like the future dimension fucks people so much. Like no one can predict the future.
Yeah.
And solving your problems is going to be altering the trajectory of the future. So that's what you should focus on.
Sure. I agree. That makes total sense.
What about you? Are you an optimist?
What if I'm like super
now
optimistic?
That I made a case against optimism.
The world is moving in the right. No, I actually share the same sentiment as you. I would say I try to be as realist as possible. Because you're right. Like you just don't know. There's a lot of inputs and not a lot of outputs. So we're gonna see where those inputs, what lead, you know, what happens.
You're right.
With these inputs, and the only thing we can do is focus what's in our control. So yeah, I'm just going to take the problems as they arise. I think that's a good outlook to have. Yeah,
and I think it's like, I mean, it's what works very consistently for like my patients and clients is like, just deal with your fucking problems.
Yeah.
And the rest of the world can be an absolute dumpster fire.
Yeah.
So extract what happiness you can when the world is falling apart.
Yeah.
You know,
agreed.
Like play some video games, eat something tasty, like go to the gym, feel good about yourself, do some yoga, meditate if you feel like it. In your case, it's have another conversation with someone about meditation.
Yep.
So in your case, the reason to meditate is because it'll, this is the other thing. I don't remember exactly when I wanted to say this, but there was one point that I wanted to, you know, the self-appraisal that happens when someone looks at you. All that stuff that you're talking about, and that's what meditation helped you with, right? Is that you felt like at peace. So like you need to do like practices in those directions. It'll help you with a lot of this racism on the internet stuff too.
Yeah.
So when you feel hurt, so I don't feel hurt by racism on the internet, and maybe I just am lucky.
Yeah. Well, me neither, though. Okay. I'm the same as you. I don't feel personally hurt at all.
Okay. Yeah. So, and you mentioned that you were more like, I want to advocate for the kid who,
for the kid, because I would be hurt if I was a kid, because I just wasn't in control of my emotions.
And I think like very practically, Squeex, like I think what we got to do is like, we got to talk to people who are like, we really dislike. And maybe even like, I mean, I've mentioned this once or twice before, but it's such a fucking lightning rod. Sure. But it's like, I would love to take two people. I mean, I don't know if I can ever do this or how much this will destroy me, but
like a Lex Friedman debate.
Sort of. Yeah. So I think like Lex Friedman is like kind of a good example, but I'd love to just take like two people who have conflict on the internet and like, let's just get into a room together and see, you know, how arrogant Dr. K is that he thinks he can make some kind of, I mean, I think it would go crazy at the least, but it's, you know, I think honestly, like, I think some of the best stuff that I could do would be having a conversation and even demonstrating the futility of it. And if we get somewhere, hopefully people will learn how to manage conflict in their own lives.
Yeah.
You know, but no one collabs with people who are
like
opposed to them.
I think the thinking is like, you don't want to give platform to someone who has really bad ideas, especially if you're not equipped to respond to them. Like I had an opportunity to speak to Vivek Ramaswamy and I really wanted to, but I was thinking about it, but I just didn't feel comfortable I just don't think I would personally be equipped to combat some of his ideas. And so my lack of knowledge, I don't want it to come off as me accepting certain things that he says. But if I was a subject expert in everything he would say, I'd love to talk to the guy, but I just had work to I just have work to do. So that's like I would say that's the alternative form of thinking. Like, I don't want to give access to my audience to bad ideas if I myself am not equipped to combat them.
But what makes you think they're bad ideas?
Well, I just think like some people's ideas are like just hurtful. They're like I've seen it, and I won't say who, like people celebrating on other people's miseries, like just like things like that are just so negative to a portion of people that just strip them away from fundamental rights like healthcare or, you know, very basic things. Like I want to make sure if someone brings that idea to me and packages it in a way that seems palatable, I can call bullshit out. And I personally don't feel equipped to do that.
Okay. So like, I think my attitude would be a little bit different, which is that, I mean, I don't think, I cannot recall ever having a stream where I tried to combat someone's ideas.
That would be so crazy.
So, I mean, I could, but
Yeah.
I don't. And that's sort of where, like, I think it's, you know, the really weird thing, and maybe I'm lucky here, but I think generally speaking, when I stop trying to combat people's ideas, we end up like making more progress. And maybe it's just because I suck at argument or debating. Mm-hmm. But I think really striving to understand, see if someone thinks something that is a really, in your mind, a really bad idea, right? I think you gotta or not, you don't have to, but I think I have to understand why this person thinks this. Because this is coming, like, people aren't stupid.
Agreed. I completely agree.
And so if someone believes something, their experience of reality is going to be different from your experience of reality, and really striving to understand that. I think I've seen a lot more progress made that way.
Sure. But like, don't you think there's also evil ideas? Like people who, like, you know how people on the, we'll say virtue signaling all the time? I've noticed on the internet, there's this opposite effect, which is vice signaling, where it's like, I'm so apathetic to people that I will signal to people how little of a shit I care. Have you seen, like, at least that's something I've noticed.
So I imagine, I think that there are evil ideas. Mm-hmm. What I'm skeptical of is how I would know which ones are evil and which ones are good. So even if you presume the existence of evil ideas that are categorically evil, how do you know the difference? Because if someone is believing an evil idea, how do you know that you're right and they're wrong? Now, I do think that there are things that are evil, let's say, and I think I know better than some people, but also there are very few people. I've worked with a lot of people who are very bad, and some of whom I would describe as evil. Like, not evil, sociopathic, which I think can be somewhat interchangeable, but there's a philosophical thing there. But I think even in working with those people, like, you know, most of the people who commit evil, the worst evils in the world, aren't committed because they're evil. They're committed because people think that they're doing righteousness.
Sure.
So I think even if you say that there's an evil idea, it's like, how do we know we're not the righteous assholes who are ruining the world? Well, because we're not. And because of this, and because of this, and because of this. But then if you talk to the other righteous asshole, they're saying the same thing. They're saying, no, you're evil. And I'm right because of this, and because of this, and because of this, and because of this. So I think even if evil ideas exist, I don't know that I have a monopoly on the good ones.
So I believe that, and might be me completely talking out of my ass, but I do believe there should be a barometer or a metric or a rubric of what makes something evil.
Sure.
And I think there is a singular truth. And so maybe I am pushing back a little bit on like what this person thinks is evil and that person thinks is evil. Like, I can say Nazism is evil because of the suffering, the human suffering. And I feel very confident in saying that. So if there is someone who's promoting Nazism, I can say, no, that's a non-starter. It's an evil idea. So the way I see it is that human suffering being number one, and like violence. And so maybe that's something that I need to work on, is like, I just have one singular like rubric that I gauge ideas off of, which is like my rubric of truth of what I feel is evil personally.
Sure, right. So that, I mean,
Yeah,
I think you and
everybody
everyone
does.
else
Yeah.
uses the rubric.
True, but like
of
I almost
what
feel
they
like there should be a
personally.
worldwide. But that's why we have things like the
Look,
peace, like war crimes. You know, like there's
Yeah,
certain things we
no, no.
accept that are evil.
Yeah. So like yes and no. So
Okay.
like I mean, I personally I agree with you.
Yeah.
So I think you can use the rubric of, does this increase the total amount of human suffering in the world
Yes.
more than the opposite?
Right.
And like you can say that, and I think that's like a good rubric, right? But it's like a utilitarian view. So there's some harsh truths that are sort of against that, which is like, number one is like the law of nature.
Yeah.
Right. So if you look at like evolution and natural selection, it's not about the benefit of the population. It's about the benefit of the individual.
Sure.
There are a lot of, situations where that is the case, or like that seems to be true in some areas. I'm not trying to suggest that we should not be utilitarian. I think it's a good like philosophical stance. But I think that the challenge is once again in your measurement. So I know this sounds crazy, but like, I think, how do you know that some particular doctrine will be like less suffering than another doctrine?
Sure.
Because I think a lot of the people who I've talked to who are sort of I wouldn't call them Nazis, but they're kind of in the Nazi camp, people who are racist, are more like, I have nothing against you. It's just, I want my territory and you can have yours. You can go back to India where your people belong. And I can be here where my people belong. And there are people in India who believe the same thing. Right.
Yeah.
So I think once again, it's about understanding, like for the people who are Nazis, like, why are they that way? Where did they start to get those beliefs? And I also agree with you that I think that truth is real.
Yeah.
But there's just a gap between our capacity to understand it and what it is.
Sure. I completely agree with that. I think that's a fair assessment.
Yeah, cool, man. This was
before we wrap up, it is such a blast to talk to you, Doctor. I can't even emphasize.
Likewise. I mean, I want to talk to you about all kinds of other things that are not nearly as serious.
I agree. We got to do some more
how
stuff.
How did you feel about my wife, the first words out of her mouth being, I've got 3 people for you to meet?
That's every Indian person.
Right?
Yeah. Every Indian person is like, you've got to meet this person.
What I was shocked by, what I was really shocked by, is her presumption that you were not in a relationship.
That's what I'm saying.
It's like, what are you seeing? Like, how
am I not in a relationship? I got a Nintendo Wii, I got a GameCube, I've got the Animal Crossing Lego in the background. I mean,
she's making so many assumptions about your relationship status, your sexuality, whether you're even into girls, right?
Maybe I'm gay.
Maybe you're asexual.
You never know. Yeah.
And I was just, that's why I was like, I'm sure you picked up, but we had a little bit of a tense conversation, not tense, but we have a playful.
I heard you called her old. That's so mean.
Not exactly, but that's what she took effrontery to. That's not that's not the words that I used. But
okay.
And then, but I was like, I don't think you can like, I don't know. Anyway.
Yeah.
But I think we got to talk about that. Like if you're, like if you're dating or not dating, or like what's going on.
I have a very secret marriage I'm in.
Yeah.
Yeah, so I don't talk about it.
Perfect. So
I'm taken. Sorry, Indian girls.
Yeah, so that's what I thought. Like, so I didn't say this to her, but I was like, I'm not so sure that he's too chill and happy to be sexually frustrated. That was my clinical assessment.
Oh yeah. Oh yeah.
This is a guy who's too satisfied.
Right.
He's too happy.
Like if whereas I'd be like on the seat, like edge of my seat screaming if I was not sexually satisfied.
You'd be one of these political commentators.
You're so right. All they
and
need
being
to get
active
is
on
laid.
Twitter.
We can solve the problems, Dr. K. We just have to get these guys laid.
I'm not kidding. So I think half of them we have to get laid.
Okay.
The other half we have to get cuddled. Like, seriously, there's a lot of dudes out there, like, toxic masculinity wise, like, they just need to be held, but they
Yes.
can't handle that. They like can't handle, like, they just need to be held.
We can make it happen. I'm sure. I'll
Yeah,
talk to. I'll
can-
pull some strings. I'll find someone who will be willing to cuddle with those guys.
Yeah. We'll figure
You're
this
so
out.
right. Yes, but a pleasure to talk to you. I love talking to a fellow Brown. It's cool
Yeah, dude,
what you're
it's
doing.
fantastic.
And I really respect
And
it.
for those other fellow Browns in the audience, y'all can be mediocre streamers too.
We give you the entryway.
Yeah. And you know,
right.
we're not the best, much like the Olympics. We can win a gold medal maybe in like archery or something, like one or two, like marksmanship or archery, right?
Yeah, the WhatsApp groups go crazy when we get like third place once every like 12 years.
So we're not the best.
No.
But y'all can do it.
You can do it.
It's better to be happy and mediocrely successful than it is to be prestigious and successful and unhappy.
True.
Take it from two dudes who left prestigious, acceptable brown person careers.
Yes. And if any uncles and aunties are listening, we're sorry. We don't mean any of it. We'll go do our puja and have Bonnie.
Other uncles and aunties are listening, he's taken.
That's right. Don't send me the biodatas anymore.
Yeah, well. All right, man. Take care, buddy.
Thank you so much. Take care.
Thank you.
Goodbye.
Adios. Okay, I don't know if are we still live? Yeah, it looks like I'm live and Squeex is gone. GG. All right, y'all. Thank y'all very much for coming. You know, oh man, I miss this. It's like I got to spend so much time. We've got a couple of good, you know, lectures and stuff coming out, so stay tuned to our YouTube channel. We have a pretty packed streaming schedule in a couple of months, it's looking like. But I really miss this. Like, I miss just like talking to people about stuff. And I don't know, man. Like, I know it's not like very drama farming and whatnot, but like, yeah, I mean, I think these are important conversations to have. So yeah, thank you all very much for coming. If you guys have, you know, additional thoughts or questions or whatever, like, I think we should, you know, post them in the Reddit. If y'all are interested in, you know, we talked about some of this weird meditation stuff. Definitely check out our membership platform. Like I go into a lot more detail about mantras and tantra and spiritual energy and the cultivation of all of these things that are fake and don't exist. With some amount of hopefully logical approach to it. And so if you guys are interested in that, check that out. And then if y'all are going through, you know, problems, and you need support that's of a non-clinical nature. So if y'all are struggling with something like bipolar disorder or something like that, then I think definitely you should go see a therapist. But if y'all are struggling with some of these more modern problems, like you can see a therapist for that too. But that's why we developed a peer coaching program. So these are people who are from the peer community. So they have a lot of lived experience. They are us, and they know what it's like to go through, to grow up in the world that we're in today. And if y'all have particular challenges and you're trying to be maybe a little bit less ego oriented in your mind, if you're trying to, you know, accomplish things or even struggling with, I am of this ethnicity and these are the prescribed career paths, but I want to do this instead. We have a bunch of like freelancers and stuff like that we've been able to help a lot and make people making career transitions. Definitely check out our coaching program. It's one of the things that we do to try to make the world a better place. And yeah, and then like keep it coming, y'all. So we're not, I'd like to do a couple of other things with my time, but this is what I'm here for. And so please let us know what direction you think we should go. How can we better help you? Whether that's posting a question or saying, hey, I'm struggling with this problem, or can you do more content like this or do this? Like all that feedback is useful. So let us know how we can make a more significant impact in your life. And we will see y'all. I don't know when we're streaming again, but we'll see y'all when we see y'all. Yeah, so more content for women with ADHD, please. Absolutely. So we've got some we've got some really great content that is sort of geared towards women coming out in the next couple of months. One of them we're delaying until the beginning of May. But we also have, speaking of, helping people, we have I don't know if this is, I think it should be available soon. Maybe y'all can't sign up yet, but we actually have a skills building workshop with Dr. Michaela. So she specializes, it's a skills building workshop, social and emotional skills for people with neurodiversity. So this is, it's not like a standard like YouTube video kind of thing. It's actually a 6-hour workshop that focuses on skills building for people specifically with neurodiversity. So your brain is a little bit different. The way it processes social information is different. The way it processes emotional information is different. So if y'all are interested, check that out. I don't know, it's leaked. Okay, so maybe it's not available yet. My bad. So we're trying to do this stuff. So we occasionally will do things like host workshops and stuff like announcement on Sunday. Sorry. Apologies. My bad. So we hear y'all, right? So a lot of what we hear is like when we have, there's a video coming out on ADHD and time blindness. And so a lot of times people will say like, hey, like, what do we do about this? And so we'll give y'all some solutions when we stream or have a video or things like that. But oftentimes, the solutions involve concrete skill building, right? So you can make a video about working out, but going to the gym and watching a video about working out are two different things. And that's why we put together some of these workshops. Oh, maybe it's out. I don't know. Dr. K Leaker, that's not my fault. I mean, it is my fault, but I consider it to be an acceptable mistake. I don't know. Like, so people are asking questions about, needing things. And so I'm telling y'all that there are things. I leaked it, but I mean, that's why I don't know. That's okay, right? Like y'all are saying, hey, I need help with this. And it's like, hey, we have this thing that we built because you're not the only one who needs help with it. And we've discovered that people who are neurodiverse really struggle with social skills and emotional skills. So we built a workshop where you can spend 6 hours working on that. And apologies for leaking. All right. Take care, everybody.